I married a stranger to save my dying father. 3 days later, I discovered my husband wasn't the poor mountain hermit everyone believed. He was hiding an empire. But when his enemies came for us both, I had to choose. Stay silent like the desperate girl I was, or become the weapon he never knew he needed. If you want to see how a girl with nothing became the force that reshuffled power itself, stay until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The fence post count was up to 47 when Clara Vance heard the horses. She didn't look up from the basin where she wrung out her father's shirt, water running pink between her knuckles. 47 posts still standing in the east pasture. 16 collapsed. The math never changed, no matter how many times she counted. The Vance property was dying the same way her father was, slowly, then all at once. The horses stopped outside the house. Clara's hands went still. 3 riders, maybe 4, judging by the sound. Nobody came up this far anymore except the debt collector, and Pierce wasn't due until Friday. It was only Wednesday. Her father coughed from the bedroom, a wet rattle that made her stomach clench. She dried her hands and stepped onto the porch. 3 men sat on horseback in the yard. The one in front wore a coat too fine for mountain country, his face soft in the way of men who'd never missed a meal. Thomas Pierce, the debt collector, had brought company. "Miss Vance," Pierce tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Hoping we might have a word." Clara crossed her arms. "You're early. Change of plans." He dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with practiced ease. The 2 men behind him stayed mounted, hands resting near their belts. Not quite threatening, not quite friendly. "I've had an opportunity come up. Someone's made me a generous offer for this property." "It's not your property to sell." "Not yet." Pierce smiled. "But come Friday, when you can't make payment, and we both know you can't, it will be. Thought I'd save everyone the trouble and work out terms now." Clara's jaw tightened. The debt was $240, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. Her father had borrowed it 3 years ago when the illness first hit, back when they still believed he'd recover and work again. Now he could barely stand long enough to dress himself. "I need until Friday." "To do what?" Pierce gestured at the property around them. "This place is done, girl. Your father's done. Best thing you can do is accept reality and move on with some dignity." The word dignity coming from Pierce's mouth made her want to spit. "I have until Friday," she repeated. Pierce's smile faded. "I'm trying to be reasonable." "Then be reasonable on Friday." Something hard crossed his face. He stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell tobacco on his breath. "You're alone up here. No family, no prospects. When I take this place, and I will take it, you'll have nothing, not even a roof. Winter's coming, Miss Vance. Think carefully about pride." Clara held his gaze. She'd been thinking about nothing but survival for 3 years. Pride was a luxury she'd burned for firewood long ago. "Friday," she said again. Pierce stared at her for a long moment, then turned and remounted. "Your funeral." He wheeled his horse around, the other 2 following. "Friday morning, dawn. Don't make me come looking." They rode down the mountain road, dust rising behind them. Clara stood on the porch until they disappeared, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides until they steadied. Inside, her father was awake. "Clara!" His voice was thin, scraped raw by the coughing. She went to his bedside. John Vance had been a strong man once, broad-shouldered and capable. Now he was bones and shadows, his skin yellow-gray in the afternoon light filtering through the curtains. "Just Pierce," she said. "Nothing important." Her father's eyes found hers. Even sick, even dying, he could still read her. "He's pushing. I told him Friday." "Clara, see?" "We have until Friday." "And then what?" Her father's hand found hers, fingers cold and trembling. "You can't fight this. The debt's legal. The terms are clear. I'll figure something out." "There's nothing to figure." He coughed again, turning his head. When he looked back, there was something worse than pain in his face. Resignation. "I'm sorry, girl. I'm sorry I did this to you." Clara squeezed his hand. "You didn't do anything. You got sick. That's not a choice. Borrowing the money was. You needed medicine. And now you need a future." Her father's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Listen to me. When I'm gone, you're not going anywhere. When I'm gone, he continued, voice firm despite the rasp, you get out of here. Don't stay in these mountains. Go to Denver. Find work. You're smart enough, Clara. Smarter than this place deserves. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd find a way, make it work, save everything. But the words wouldn't come because they both knew the truth. In 2 days, she'd lose the house, the land, everything. And a week after that, maybe 2 if she was lucky, her father would be gone. I'll get you some broth, she said instead. She was in the kitchen when she heard the second horse. This time, just one rider. Clara looked through the window and saw a man dismounting in the yard, tall, broad across the shoulders, wearing work clothes that had seen actual work. He moved with the careful economy of someone used to long days in rough country. Dark hair, dark beard, maybe 30 or a little older. She didn't recognize him. Clara stepped onto the porch. Can I help you? The man turned. His eyes were gray, direct without being aggressive. Miss Vance? That's right. My name's Rowan Hale. I'm looking for work. Heard you might need a hand around the property. Clara almost laughed. The absurdity of it. A stranger showing up asking for work when she couldn't even pay her debts, let alone wages. You heard wrong. Fences need mending. Rowan gestured toward the east pasture. Roof's got gaps. Firewood's low for winter. I can't pay you. Didn't ask for pay. Clara studied him. There was something off about this. Men didn't ride into mountain country offering free labor unless they wanted something, and she'd learned young that what they wanted usually wasn't good. What do you want? She asked bluntly. Rowan's expression didn't change. To make a deal? What kind of deal? The kind where you keep your property and I get something I need. Clara's stomach tightened. She knew where this was going. She'd been pretty once, before 3 years of exhaustion and worry had worn her down. Still had enough looks that men like Pierce watched her a certain way. I'm not interested in that kind of arrangement. Marriage, Rowan said. I'm talking about marriage. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Excuse me? I need a wife. Rowan said it like he was discussing a business transaction. Legal, formal, permanent. You need money and someone to help with your father. Seems like we could help each other. Clara stared at him. You're insane. Practical. You don't even know me. Know enough. You're smart, capable, not afraid of hard work. He paused. And you're desperate. The word hit like a slap. Clara's hands curled into fists. Get off my property. Hear me out. No. She stepped back toward the door. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested. Leave. Rowan didn't move. I can pay your debt. All of it. Today. Clara froze with her hand on the door frame. $240, Rowan continued. Clear the books with Pierce, keep the property, pay for your father's medicine and care. He met her eyes. All I'm asking in return is marriage. Why? The question came out hoarse. Why would you do that? I have my reasons. That's not an answer. Rowan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, careful. I need a wife for legal purposes. Inheritance issues. It needs to be legitimate, documented, beyond question. I'm willing to pay well for it. You could marry anyone. Not anyone. Most women want love, romance, promises I can't keep. You want survival. That's honest. That's something I can work with. Clara's mind was racing. This was crazy. Marrying a complete stranger because he offered money. It was desperate and dangerous and probably stupid. But the alternative was losing everything, being homeless with a dying father as winter approached. What exactly are you proposing? She asked slowly. Marriage certificate filed with the county. You take my name, move to my property. I'll provide for you and your father house, food, medicine, everything you need. In return, you act as my legal wife. That's it. That's it? Something flickered in Rowan's expression. I'm not looking for a traditional arrangement. I need the legal status, not... He gestured vaguely. The rest of it. Clara tried to read him. There was something he wasn't saying, some piece he was holding back. But the offer itself was clear enough. Marry him, gain security, refuse, lose everything. I need to think, she said. Take until tomorrow. Rowan moved toward his horse. But Pierce comes Friday. By then it'll be too late. How do you know about Pierce? Rowan swung into the saddle. Small town. People talk. He gathered the reins. I'll be at the boarding house in town. Send word when you decide. He rode away before Clara could respond. She stood on the porch long after he'd disappeared, trying to make sense of what just happened. A marriage proposal from a stranger. Money to solve all her problems. It felt like a fever dream, the kind of desperate fantasy she'd catch herself spinning late at night when the walls closed in. Clara? Her father's voice carried from the bedroom. She went inside, still dazed. Who was that? Clara sat on the edge of his bed. For a moment she considered lying, dismissing it as nothing, but her father deserved the truth. His name's Rowan Hale. He wants to marry me. Her father blinked. What? She explained the offer, the money, the terms, the strange formality of it all. As she spoke, she watched her father's face cycle through confusion, concern, and something that looked uncomfortably like hope. It's a trap, he said when she finished. Has to be. Maybe. Clara, you can't seriously be considering this. Why not? Because he's a stranger. You don't know anything about him, where he's from, what he wants, why he's really doing this. I know he has $240, and I don't. Her father's expression crumpled. Don't do this because of me. Don't throw your life away. My life is already gone, Clara said quietly. In 2 days we lose the house. A week after that, you'll... She couldn't finish the sentence. At least this way, there's a chance. A chance for what? To be trapped with a man who might be dangerous, disturbed, to survive. Clara met his eyes. That's all I want, Dad. Just to survive this. Her father reached for her hand. You deserve better than survival. Maybe. But survival's all that's on the table right now. They sat in silence. Outside, the afternoon light was fading toward dusk. Clara thought about fence posts and debt collectors, about winter coming and the slow, inevitable collapse of everything she'd known. If you do this, her father said finally, promise me something. What? The first sign he's not what he claims, the first hint of danger, you run. You take whatever money you can and you run. Understand? Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure she meant it. Running required options, and options required resources. If this went wrong, she'd have neither. That night, she lay in bed counting options instead of fence posts. The math was even simpler. She could refuse Rowan's offer and lose everything by Friday. Or she could accept and gamble on the unknown. Some choice. Morning came gray and cold. Clara made her decision before the sun fully rose. The ride into town took an hour. The settlement was barely worthy of the name. A general store, a boarding house, a church that doubled as a school, maybe 30 buildings total clinging to the mountainside like they might slide off at any moment. Clara tied her horse outside the boarding house and went inside. Mrs. Chen, who ran the place, looked up from her accounts. Clara, didn't expect to see you. I'm looking for someone. Rowan Hale. Is he here? Something shifted in Mrs. Chen's face. Room 4. Upstairs. Clara climbed the narrow staircase, her heart hammering. This was insane. She was about to agree to marry a complete stranger based on nothing but desperation and a gut feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She knocked on door 4. Come in. Rowan was sitting by the window reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. I'll do it, Clara said before she could change her mind. Your deal. I'll marry you. Rowan set down the paper. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He stood, crossing to a bag on the bed. From it he pulled a leather pouch and counted out bills. $240 in clean, new currency, more money than Clara had ever seen in one place. We'll go to the county office today, Rowan said. File the certificate, then I'll pay Pierce. Just like that? Just like that. He held out the money. Unless you've changed your mind. Clara took the bills. The paper felt strange in her hands. Too smooth, too crisp, like something that couldn't possibly be real. I haven't changed my mind, she said, but I have conditions. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Conditions? If we're doing this, I need to know what happens to my father, where he'll live, who'll care for him. He'll come with us. I have room. And when he... Clara swallowed. After. What happens to me then? You'll still be my wife. Nothing changes. What if I want to leave? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then you leave. I'm not a jailer, Clara. You'll be free to go whenever you want. With what money? I'll provide funds, enough to start over somewhere if that's what you choose. It was a better answer than she'd expected. Not good enough to erase the fear, but enough to make the gamble feel slightly less insane. All right, she said. Let's do this before I come to my senses. The county office was a single room attached to the general store. The clerk, a tired-looking man named Morrison, barely glanced up as they entered. Help you? Marriage certificate, Rowan said. Morrison pulled out a form. Names? They went through the formalities, full names, dates of birth, current addresses. Clara's hand shook slightly as she signed her name. This was it. The moment everything changed, Morrison stamped the document. Congratulations. That'll be $2. Rowan paid. Just like that, Clara Vance became Clara Hale. They walked back outside into the cold morning. Clara felt strange, disconnected, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. We should see Pierce next, Rowan said. Get this settled. They found Thomas Pierce at the tavern, drinking coffee and reviewing papers. He looked up as they approached, his face shifting from annoyance to confusion. Miss Vance? What? Mrs. Hale now, Clara said. The name felt foreign in her mouth. I'm here about the debt. Pierce's eyes narrowed. What about it? Rowan set the money on the table. $240, full payment. Pierce stared at the bills like they might bite him. Where did you... His gaze shifted to Rowan, really seeing him for the first time. Who the hell are you? Her husband. Rowan's voice was level, unconcerned. The debt's paid. Draw up the release. Pierce's face was reddening. Now hold on. The debt's paid, Rowan repeated. Unless there's some legal reason you can't accept payment? They both knew there wasn't. Pierce had structured the loan legally, which meant he had to accept legal payment. But Clara could see the fury in his eyes. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He'd been planning to take the property, probably had a buyer lined up. Fine. Pierce practically spat the word. He pulled out another form, scrawling angrily. Debt satisfied, paid in full. He shoved the paper across the table. Congratulations on your marriage. The words dripped with contempt. Clara took the release, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her coat. Thank you for your understanding. Pierce didn't respond, just stared at them with barely contained rage as they left. Outside, Clara's legs felt weak. He's going to cause problems. Probably, Rowan agreed, but he can't touch the debt now. That part's done. They rode back to the Vance property in silence. Clara's mind was churning. What had she just done? She'd married a stranger, taken his money, bound herself to him legally and permanently, and she still didn't know why he really wanted this. At the house, her father was sitting on the porch. He stood slowly as they approached, leaning heavily on his cane. Clara, it's done. She showed him the release. Debt's paid, house is ours. Her father's eyes moved to Rowan. You must be Hale. Yes, sir. Rowan dismounted. I want to assure you, I mean your daughter, no harm. This arrangement is exactly what I said, legal marriage in exchange for financial security. Nothing more, nothing less. Words are easy, Clara's father said. They are, but I'll back them with actions. You and Clara will move to my property within the week. I'll provide everything you need, medicine, food, comfort. You have my word. A stranger's word. The only word I can give. Rowan met his eyes steadily. I understand your concern. If I were in your position, I'd feel the same, but I'm asking you to trust that I have no interest in causing your daughter harm. Clara's father looked at her. She nodded slightly. What else could they do? The deal was made. When do we leave? Her father asked finally. 3 days. That gives you time to settle affairs here. Pack what you want to bring. And where exactly is this property of yours? North. Up in the high country. It's remote but comfortable. Something in the way he said remote made Clara's stomach tighten. How remote? How far from help if things went wrong? But she didn't ask. Not yet. First, she needed to get through the next 3 days. News of the marriage spread through town like wildfire. By evening, Clara could feel the stares every time she went outside. She made one more trip to the general store for supplies and heard the whispers follow her down the aisles. Married that stranger. Sold herself for the debt. Poor girl, desperate times. Clara kept her head up and her face neutral. Let them talk. They'd been talking about her for years anyway, pitying her, judging her, offering hollow sympathy while doing nothing to help. At least now she had options. At the counter, Mrs. Chen rang up her purchases with unusual quietness. Finally, as Clara was leaving, the older woman spoke. Be careful, girl. Clara turned. What? Rowan Hale. Mrs. Chen's voice was low. Nobody knows him. Nobody knows where he came from or what he really does. That kind of mystery usually means trouble. He paid my debt. Men don't do that for nothing. Mrs. Chen's eyes were serious. Watch yourself, and if you need help, you know where to find me. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in months. Clara nodded, throat tight. Thank you. The next 3 days passed in a blur of packing and preparation. Clara went through the house room by room, deciding what to keep, what to leave. Each object carried weight, her mother's dishes, her father's tools, the quilt she'd made when she was 12. Taking them felt presumptuous, like she actually believed this arrangement might work. Leaving them felt like accepting she'd never come back. Rowan appeared each morning, working on the property without being asked. He fixed the fence posts Clara had been counting, patched the roof, split firewood. He moved with quiet efficiency, speaking little but accomplishing much. Clara watched him work, trying to understand what kind of man did this. The marriage was legal now. He had what he wanted. Yet here he was, laboring in the cold for no apparent reason. On the second day, she brought him coffee while he was repairing the barn door. You don't have to do this, she said. Rowan took the cup. I know. Then why are you? He was quiet for a moment, testing the door hinge. Because it needs doing. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He looked at her directly. I know you don't trust me, Clara. I'm not asking you to, but I keep my word. I said I'd provide for you, and that includes making sure this place doesn't fall apart before we leave. Why does it matter? We're leaving anyway. It matters because you might want to come back someday. This is your home. Should be here if you need it. The answer surprised her. Clara studied his face, looking for deception, hidden motives. All she saw was a man fixing a barn door because it needed fixing. Thank you, she said finally. Rowan nodded and went back to work. On the third day, Pierce showed up one last time. Clara was in the yard when he rode up, alone this time. She straightened, ready for confrontation. Come to say goodbye? She asked. Pierce dismounted, his expression hard. Came to give you some advice. I don't need your advice. You're making a mistake. Pierce stepped closer. That man you married? Something's not right about him. Too much money appearing from nowhere, too secretive about where he's from. Smart girl like you should be asking questions. I did ask questions. And you believe the answers? Pierce shook his head. You're desperate, I understand that. But desperation makes people stupid. Makes them ignore warning signs. Clara's jaw tightened. Is there a point to this? The point is, when this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, don't come crying to me. Pierce's voice was cold. You had a chance to handle this with dignity. Instead, you threw in with a stranger. That's on you. He rode away before she could respond. Clara stood in the yard, Pierce's words echoing. He was right about one thing. She was taking a huge risk. Rowan could be anyone, hiding anything. She'd married him without references, without background, without any real knowledge of who he was or what he wanted. But what choice did she have? Die slowly in poverty or gamble on the unknown? She'd made her choice. That evening, Rowan arrived with a wagon. Ready? Clara looked at the house one last time. The sagging porch, the crooked shutters, the worn steps she'd climbed 10,000 times. Her whole life lived in these rooms. Now she was leaving, possibly forever, with a man she barely knew. Ready, she said. They loaded her father first, making him comfortable in the wagon bed with blankets and pillows. Then the belongings, trunks of clothes, boxes of dishes, her mother's rocking chair. Everything Clara owned fit in one wagon. The realization was simultaneously freeing and devastating. As the sun set, they left. Clara sat beside Rowan on the driver's bench, watching her home disappear behind them. Her father was silent in the back, lost in his own thoughts. The road north was rougher than Clara expected. They climbed steadily, leaving the settlement behind, pushing deeper into mountain country where the trees grew thicker and the air turned sharp. The terrain was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, all rock and pine and endless sky. They traveled for hours. The moon rose, casting silver light across the landscape. Clara's body ached from the jolting wagon, but she didn't complain. Rowan drove with steady focus, navigating the treacherous road like he'd done it 1,000 times. Finally, Clara spoke. "How much further?" "Few more hours." "Where exactly are we going?" "My property, like I said." "You said it was remote. You didn't say it was in the middle of nowhere." Rowan's expression didn't change. "It's not nowhere, it's just apart." "Apart from what?" "Everything." The answer should have scared her. Instead, Clara felt a strange calm settling in. They'd passed the point of no return hours ago. Whatever waited at the end of this road, she'd have to face it. The landscape grew stranger as they climbed. The road, because it was a road, Clara realized, not just a trail, was too well maintained for this elevation. Someone had cleared it recently, graded the surface, reinforced the turns. For a hermit's property, it showed surprising infrastructure. Then she saw the first building. It appeared suddenly around a bend, a large structure, more warehouse than house, sitting in a clearing carved from the forest. Lights burned in the windows. As they drew closer, Clara could hear the distant sound of machinery. "What is that?" she asked. "Storage facility." Rowan guided the wagon past it. "For timber." "You're a logger?" "Among other things." They passed 2 more buildings, both substantial, both showing signs of activity even at this late hour. Clara's confusion was giving way to something else. Suspicion. This wasn't a hermit's property. This was an operation. The road opened into a wide valley. Clara's breath caught. A house stood at the valley's center. Not a cabin, not a shack, but an actual house. 2 stories, solid construction, glass windows reflecting moonlight. Around it spread more buildings, more equipment, more signs of extensive organized work. "What is this place?" Clara demanded. Rowan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Home. This isn't—" Clara struggled for words. "You said you needed money for inheritance issues. You said you were a worker looking for a wife. You let me think. I never said I was poor. You let me assume it. You assumed because that's what you needed to believe." Rowan set the brake. "If I'd told you the truth, would you have accepted?" Clara stared at him. The truth. She still didn't know what the truth was. "Who are you really?" she asked. Rowan met her eyes. "Same person I've always been. I just own more land than you thought." "This isn't land. This is—" Clara gestured at the valley, the buildings, the obvious infrastructure of something much larger than a simple homestead. "This is an empire." "That's dramatic." "Is it?" Clara's voice was rising. "You lied to me." "I omitted details. There's a difference." "The hell there is!" Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky with anger and exhaustion. "You made me think I was marrying a poor mountain man who needed help with inheritance papers. Instead, I find out you're— what? Some kind of timber baron hiding in the mountains?" "I'm not hiding." "Then what do you call this?" Rowan climbed down, moving to help Clara's father from the wagon. "I call it privacy. I built something here, something that works. I don't advertise it because I don't need people's attention or interference. That's not the same as hiding." Clara wanted to scream, or cry, or possibly both. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, to think. Being angry wouldn't change anything. She was here now, married, legally bound. She needed to understand what she'd gotten herself into. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly. "All of it. What is this place? What do you really do? And why did you actually need to marry me?" Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but let's get your father inside first, then we'll talk." They carried her father into the house. Clara barely registered the interior, warm, well-furnished, nothing like the rough mountain dwelling she'd expected. A woman appeared, older, gray-haired, wearing a practical dress and apron. "This is Margaret," Rowan said. "She manages the house. Margaret, this is my wife Clara, and her father John." Margaret's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked. "Ma'am, sir, welcome. I'll prepare rooms." She disappeared upstairs. Clara helped settle her father in a chair by the fire, then turned to Rowan. Now, talk. Rowan poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. Clara didn't usually drink, but tonight she made an exception. I own timber rights to about 40,000 acres of mountain forest, Rowan began. Selective harvesting, sustainable practices. The operation employs about 60 men, produces roughly 2 million board feet a year. I sell to buyers in 3 states. Clara's head was spinning. 40,000 acres? Give or take. That's a lot, yes. So why the secrecy? Why not just operate openly? Operate. Rowan sat down across from her. Because my uncle thinks he should run this operation instead of me. He's challenged my ownership twice in the past 5 years. Both times the courts ruled in my favor, but barely. The operation was started by my grandfather, passed to my father, then to me when my father died. My uncle believes I'm too young, too inexperienced. He's been looking for any legal avenue to take control. And marriage helps how? Inheritance law. If I'm married, my stake in the company becomes community property. Harder to challenge, harder to separate. It adds a layer of legal protection my uncle can't easily bypass. Clara took a drink, the whiskey burning down her throat. So I'm a legal shield. Yes. You could have told me this. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was insane, offering that much money for a marriage of convenience? He had a point. Clara wouldn't have believed any of this without seeing it. What else haven't you told me? She asked. That's the main piece. The rest is details, business arrangements, timber contracts, nothing that affects you directly. Everything affects me now. I'm your wife. Legally, yes, but Clara, Rowan leaned forward. I meant what I said. This doesn't have to be more than a business arrangement. You get security, stability, resources. I get legal protection. We both benefit. And when your uncle challenges again, because he will, won't he? Probably. What happens then? We present a united front, show him the marriage is legitimate, permanent, beyond question. After that, he'll have to accept it. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe this could work, that she'd made the right choice, but doubt gnawed at her. I need time, she said, to think, to process all this. Take all the time you need. Rowan stood. Margaret will show you to your room. We can talk more tomorrow. Clara nodded. She was too exhausted to argue further. Margaret appeared and led her upstairs. The room was large, comfortable, with its own fireplace already burning. A window looked out over the valley, where light still glowed in some of the distant buildings. Mr. Hale is a good man, Margaret said quietly as she turned down the bed. Honest, fair. Whatever else you're thinking, know that. You've worked for him long? 5 years. He treats people well, pays fair wages, doesn't lie. Margaret met Clara's eyes. I know this is strange, but you could have done worse. After Margaret left, Clara stood at the window, looking out at this new world she'd stumbled into. Somewhere in the darkness, men were working. Timber was being cut, processed, shipped. Money was being made. And she was suddenly at the center of it all, married to a man she didn't know, part of a war she didn't understand. She thought about Pierce's warning, about her father's concern, about her own leap into the unknown. Maybe they were all right. Maybe this was a disaster waiting to unfold. But as Clara finally crawled into bed, exhausted beyond measure, one thought kept circulating. At least she was warm. At least her father would have medicine. At least they'd survived another day. Tomorrow could bring whatever it wanted. Tonight, that was enough. Clara woke to voices arguing below her window. She sat up, disoriented. Sunlight poured through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The marriage. The valley. The revelation that her husband wasn't poor at all, but controlled an empire she'd known nothing about. The voices grew louder. Clara crossed to the window and looked down. Rowan stood in the yard with 3 men, all wearing work clothes stained with sawdust and pitch. One of them, stocky, red-faced, maybe 40, was jabbing a finger toward Rowan's chest. You can't just shut down the North Cut without warning, the man was saying. We've got quotas to meet, contracts to fill. The North Cut stays closed. Rowan's voice was level but firm. Trees are too young. Give it another 3 years. 3 years? We'll lose buyers. Then we lose buyers. I'm not harvesting immature timber just to meet quotas. Your grandfather wouldn't have. My grandfather isn't here. Rowan's tone sharpened. I am. The north cut stays closed. The stocky man looked like he wanted to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. He turned and stalked away, the other two following. Rowan watched them go, his expression unreadable. Clara dressed quickly and went downstairs. The house in daylight was even more impressive than she'd realized. High ceilings, real glass in the windows, furniture that looked store-bought rather than handmade. This wasn't frontier living. This was wealth, carefully hidden in the mountains. She found her father in the kitchen with Margaret, eating breakfast. He looked better than he had in weeks. Color in his face, sitting upright without the cane. Clara. Relief flooded his features. I was starting to worry. I'm fine. She sat down across from him. How are you feeling? Good. Surprisingly good. He glanced at Margaret. She's been very kind. Already sent for medicine from town. Margaret set a plate in front of Clara. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread. More food than Clara usually saw in 3 days. Mr. Hale left instructions. Whatever you or your father need, I'm to provide. Where is he? Out at the mill. He'll be back for lunch. Clara ate slowly, her mind churning. Through the window, she could see the valley spread out below. Buildings, equipment, men moving with purposeful activity. This wasn't a homestead. It was an industry. After breakfast, Clara left her father resting and went outside. If she was going to be trapped here, married to a man she barely knew, she at least wanted to understand what she'd gotten herself into. The valley was bigger than it had seemed in moonlight. Clara counted at least a dozen substantial buildings. Warehouses, workshops, what looked like barracks for workers. Roads connected everything, well-maintained and clearly planned. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic sound of sawing. She followed the main road toward the noise. Workers passed her, most nodding politely but looking puzzled. News of Rowan's sudden marriage probably hadn't spread yet. Soon enough, they'd all know she existed, and then the questions would start. The sawmill was a massive structure at the valley's eastern edge. Clara could hear it from 100 yards away. The shriek of blades, the crash of lumber, men shouting over the din. She stepped inside cautiously. The noise was overwhelming. Huge logs moved on conveyor systems, guided by workers toward spinning saw blades. The air was thick with sawdust. Men worked in coordinated teams, each with a specific role in the process of transforming raw timber into finished boards. Can I help you, ma'am? Clara turned. A young man, maybe 20, was looking at her with polite confusion. I'm just looking around, she said. You probably shouldn't be in here. It's dangerous if you don't know the systems. I'll be careful. The young man hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle a strange woman wandering through the mill. Finally, he nodded. Stay near the walls, don't touch anything. Clara watched the operation for 20 minutes, fascinated despite herself. There was a precision to it, a choreography. Each worker knew exactly what to do and when. Logs came in one end, processed lumber went out the other. The whole thing ran like a machine. She was studying the conveyor mechanism when someone grabbed her arm. Clara spun. Rowan was standing behind her, his expression tight with controlled anger. What are you doing here? He asked. Looking around. This isn't a place for looking around. He steered her toward the exit. One wrong step and you could lose a hand, or worse. Outside, away from the noise, Rowan released her arm. You can't just wander into active work sites, Clara. These operations are dangerous. I wasn't in the way. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Clara crossed her arms. You bring me to this place, drop a bomb about who you really are, and then expect me to just sit in the house and wait? I want to understand what this is. Rowan's jaw worked. Finally, he sighed. Fine. You want to understand? Come with me. He led her through the valley, pointing out each building and explaining its function. The main mill processed raw logs. The planing mill smoothed and finished boards. The dry kilns removed moisture. The warehouses stored finished product waiting for shipment. The office building handled contracts and accounts. How many people work here? Clara asked. 63 currently. Goes up during peak season. And they all live here? Most. We have barracks for single men, cabins for families. Rowan gestured toward the western slope. There's a whole community up there. General store, school, everything they need. Clara stared. You built a town. I built a sustainable operation. People need places to live, stores to shop, schools for their children. Providing that means I keep good workers. They walked in silence for a while. Clara tried to absorb the scale of it all. This wasn't just a business. It was an entire self-contained world, hidden in the mountains. Why here? She asked finally. Why build all this so far from civilization? The trees are here, and my grandfather wanted privacy. Your grandfather must have been quite a person. Rowan's expression shifted, something complicated, not quite grief, but close. He was difficult, brilliant, but difficult. Built this from nothing, fought every inch of the way. When he died, he left it to my father. When my father died, it came to me. How old were you? 22. The same age Clara was now. She tried to imagine inheriting something this massive, this complex, at 22. The responsibility would have crushed her. Your uncle thinks you're too young to run it, she said. My uncle thinks everyone is too young to run it except him. Rowan kicked at a stone. He's been fighting me for 6 years. Every decision I make, he challenges. Every change I implement, he opposes. It's exhausting. Why not just sell it to him? Rowan stopped walking. Because this is mine. My grandfather built it, my father expanded it, and I'm making it sustainable. My uncle would strip mine every acre for maximum profit and bankrupt the whole operation within 5 years. I won't let that happen. There was steel in his voice. Clara understood that tone. It was the same way she'd felt about her father's house. Some things you didn't give up, even when it would be easier. They reached a small office building near the center of the valley. Rowan unlocked the door and led her inside. The space was utilitarian: desk, filing cabinets, maps on the walls showing timber plots and roads. This is where I work mostly, Rowan said. Planning harvests, managing contracts, reviewing accounts. He pulled out a ledger, opening it to reveal columns of numbers. Want to see what a sustainable timber operation looks like on paper? Clara moved closer. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of board feet, hundreds of dollars in transactions, complex calculations of yield and growth rates. You do all this yourself? She asked. I have a foreman who handles day-to-day operations, but the planning, the strategy, that's me. Clara studied the ledger. Despite the complexity, there was logic to it. Each section was clearly organized, each calculation built on the previous one. It was actually quite elegant. This harvest cycle here, she said, pointing to a column. You're rotating through 5 zones on a 20-year schedule? Rowan looked surprised. Yes. How did you... Yes. It's just math. Each zone gets 4 years to recover before the next cut. Means you're never depleting faster than the forest can regrow. Clara traced her finger down the numbers. And you're calculating yield based on measured growth rates, not estimates. Smart. More accurate. You understand this. It's not that complicated, just systematic thinking. Clara looked up. Why are you surprised? Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking timber management. Most people probably haven't spent 3 years calculating fence post replacement schedules to avoid starvation. Clara returned her attention to the ledger. This is just a different kind of survival math. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. You're right. It is. They spent the next hour going through the books. Rowan explained the business, contracts with buyers in 3 states, relationships with railroads for shipping, the constant balance between harvest rates and forest health. Clara asked questions, lots of them, and Rowan answered without condescension. She was studying a map of the timber plots when the door opened. The stocky man from that morning entered, stopping short when he saw Clara. Didn't know you had company, he said to Rowan. Walter, this is my wife, Clara. Clara, Walter Barnes, my foreman. Walter's eyes widened. Wife, since when? Since 3 days ago. You got married and didn't tell anyone? Walter looked between them, clearly trying to process this. Where did you even... It's complicated, Rowan said, but it's legal and it's done. Clara will be living here from now on. Walter's expression suggested he had many thoughts about this, none of which he was going to voice. Well, congratulations then. He turned to Clara. Welcome to the operation, Mrs. Hale. The name still sounded wrong to Clara's ears. Thank you. I actually came to talk about the North Cut, Walter said to Rowan. The men are upset. The men will adapt, Rowan said firmly. The North Cut stays closed. We've got the Brennan contract to fulfill. Without the North Cut, we'll come up short. Then we negotiate new terms with Brennan. Walter's face reddened. He's not going to like that. Probably not, but I'm not harvesting immature timber to make him happy. My grandfather isn't here, Rowan's voice rose. How many times do I have to say that? This is my operation now. We do things my way. Walter opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at Clara, clearly uncomfortable arguing in front of her. Fine, but when Brennan pulls his contract, don't say I didn't warn you. He left, slamming the door harder than necessary. Rowan rubbed his face. Sorry you had to see that. Does that happen often? More often than I'd like. Rowan moved to the window, looking out over the valley. Half the men here worked for my grandfather. They remember how he did things. Aggressive harvesting, maximum yield, damn the long-term consequences. They think I'm weak for caring about forest health. You're not weak. You're thinking past next quarter. Try telling them that. Clara joined him out of the window. In the distance, she could see workers moving between buildings, the whole operation humming with activity. How long until your uncle challenges you again? Could be any time. He's been quiet for 8 months, which probably means he's building a case. And the marriage helps how, exactly? Rowan was quiet for a moment. My grandfather's will specified the operation should stay in family hands. My uncle has been arguing I'm too young, too inexperienced, essentially that I'm not fit to lead the family business. But if I'm married, established, building a household, it's harder for him to paint me as an irresponsible kid. So I'm proof of your maturity. In legal terms, yes. Clara considered this. What happens if we divorce? It weakens my position significantly, makes it look like I'm unstable. So I'm trapped here. You're not trapped. But yes, leaving would have consequences. Rowan met her eyes. I told you I'd provide funds if you wanted to go. I meant it, but I won't lie. It would hurt my case. At least he was being honest. Clara appreciated that more than hollow reassurances. I need to check on my father, she said. Back at the main house, Clara found her father sitting on the porch with a blanket across his lap. He looked peaceful, healthier than she'd seen him in months. How are you feeling? She asked, sitting beside him. Better. Margaret's been dosing me with some kind of tonic. Tastes like hell, but it's helping. Good. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley. Finally, her father spoke. What do you think of all this? Clara chose her words carefully. It's not what I expected. That's an understatement. Her father shook his head. A timber empire hidden in the mountains, and you're married to the man running it. Legally married. Is there another kind? Clara didn't answer. Her father was right. Legal or not, marriage was marriage. She'd bound herself to Rowan in ways that wouldn't be easy to undo. Do you trust him? Her father asked. I don't know him well enough to trust him. That's not what I asked. Clara thought about Rowan, his directness, his willingness to explain the business, the way he'd been honest about the marriage serving his interests. I think he means what he says. Whether that's the same as trust, I'm not sure. Her father patted her hand. Be careful, girl. Men with this much power, this much money, they get used to controlling things. Don't let him control you. I won't. But even as she said it, Clara wondered if she was already controlled. She was here, married, legally bound. How much freedom did she really have? That night at dinner, Margaret served a meal that would have fed Clara's household for a week. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, apple pie. Clara and her father sat at a long table across from Rowan. The formality of it strange and uncomfortable. I've been thinking, Clara said halfway through the meal. If I'm going to be here, I should be useful. Rowan looked up. You don't have to work. I'm not good at sitting idle. There must be something I can do. What did you have in mind? You mentioned accounts, contracts. Someone has to manage all that paperwork. Rowan set down his fork. You want to work in the office? Unless there's a reason I can't. No reason. I'm just surprised. Why? You showed me the books this morning. I understood them. Seems like I could be helpful. Rowan studied her. Most women wouldn't want to spend their days doing clerical work. I'm not most women. Clara met his gaze steadily. And I'm not interested in being decorative. If I'm here, I work. That's the deal. Something like respect crossed Rowan's face. All right, you can start tomorrow. I'll show you the filing system. Clara's father was watching this exchange with barely concealed amusement. Your mother was the same way, he said to Clara. Couldn't stand being useless. Always had to be doing something productive. I remember. After dinner, Clara walked through the valley alone. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Lights were coming on in the distant cabins, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked almost peaceful. She found herself back at the office building. Through the window, she could see Rowan inside, hunched over the desk, working by lamplight. He looked tired, the weight of everything pressing on his shoulders. Clara thought about walking in, offering to help. Instead, she turned and headed back to the house. Tomorrow would be soon enough to start working. Tonight, she needed to think. In her room, Clara pulled out the marriage certificate and studied it. Her signature looked strange next to Rowan's, two names bound together on paper. Clara Hale. She'd been Clara Vance her entire life. Now she was someone else, someone new. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Morning came cold and clear. Clara dressed and went down to breakfast, where Rowan was already waiting. Ready to start? He asked. Yes. They walked to the office together. Inside, Rowan showed her the filing system. Contracts organized by buyer, timber plots mapped and numbered, account ledgers tracking every transaction. It was complex but logical. Main thing is accuracy, Rowan explained. One mistake in the ledgers and we could lose thousands without realizing it. I can handle accuracy. Rowan handed her a stack of receipts. These need to be entered and filed. Think you can manage? Clara took the receipts. We'll find out. She worked through the morning, losing herself in the rhythm of numbers and organization. It was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected, bringing order to chaos, making sense of complexity. By lunch, she'd processed half the stack and found 2 errors in previous entries. You're fast, Rowan said when he returned to check her progress. And thorough. Clara showed him the errors. These calculations were off, not by much, but enough to matter. Rowan frowned at the numbers. Who did these entries? No idea. They're not signed. Probably Walter. He hates paperwork, rushes through it. Rowan made notes to correct the errors. Good catch. They ate lunch at the desk, working through problems as they came up. Clara found herself enjoying it, the challenge of the work, the satisfaction of solving puzzles. And Rowan was a good teacher, explaining things clearly without talking down to her. Why timber? She asked at one point. Your grandfather could have built a business anywhere. Why trees? His father was a logger back east. Died in an accident when my grandfather was young, so he grew up hating the industry, the way it chewed through men and forests without caring about either. Rowan traced a finger along a map of the timber plots. When he came west and saw these mountains, he wanted to prove it could be done differently. Sustainable harvesting, fair wages, safety protocols, build something that would last generations instead of burning out in 20 years. Did it work? Mostly. The operation's still here, still profitable, but it requires constant vigilance. One bad season, one major accident, one shift in market prices, and everything could collapse. Is that why you're so careful about harvest rates? Partly. Also because I saw what aggressive harvesting does. My father tried it for a few years, pushed too hard. We lost a whole section of forest to disease because the trees were weakened from overcutting. Took a decade to recover. Clara studied the map. So the North Cut being closed, that's you learning from his mistakes. Yes, even if it costs us contracts short term. Walter doesn't see it that way. Walter sees quarterly profits. I see 20-year cycles. Rowan leaned back. Which is why I need people who understand long-term thinking. People like you. The compliment surprised Clara. You barely know me. No. I know you spent 3 years keeping your father alive on nothing. That takes planning, discipline, the ability to think past today's crisis to tomorrow's survival. Those are exactly the skills I need. Clara wasn't sure how to respond to that. Before she could figure it out, the door opened and a young man entered. Early 20s, well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having worried about money. Rowan, we need to... He stopped, seeing Clara. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Clara, this is James Peterson, our timber surveyor. James, my wife Clara. James's eyebrows shot up. Wife? Since when do you have a wife? Since recently. How recently? Does it matter? James laughed, incredulous. You just casually got married and didn't tell anyone? That's very you, Rowan. What did you need, James? Right. The West Section survey is done. We've got good density, should be ready for harvest in 2 years. He pulled out a folder, then seemed to remember Clara was there. Should I come back when you're not busy? Clara's working with me now. You can speak freely. James glanced between them, clearly puzzled but willing to roll with it. He spread maps across the desk and started explaining the survey results. Clara listened, following along as best she could. What about the creek section? Rowan asked, pointing to an area on the map. Still too wet. Give it another 5 years. And the ridge? Perfect. Could start harvesting there next spring if you wanted. They discussed details for 20 minutes. Clara noticed James kept shooting her curious looks, like he couldn't quite figure out what she was doing there. After James left, Clara turned to Rowan. How many people know we're married? Just Walter, James, and Margaret now. When are you planning to tell everyone else? When it becomes necessary. And when is that? Rowan was quiet. When my uncle shows up, which he will, eventually. Clara absorbed this. So I'm a secret weapon you're keeping in reserve. You're my wife. And yes, my uncle doesn't know you exist yet. I'd like to keep it that way until I'm ready to use it. The phrasing bothered Clara. Use it, like she was a tool rather than a person. But she understood the strategy. Surprise could be valuable. Fine, she said. But eventually people will notice I'm here. Let them notice. Just don't confirm anything until I say so. Over the next week, Clara settled into a routine. Mornings in the office, working through paperwork and accounts. Afternoons either learning more about the operation or spending time with her father, who was growing stronger every day under Margaret's care. Evenings were quiet, usually spent reading in her room. She and Rowan developed an easy working relationship. He trusted her judgment, asked her opinion, treated her like a partner rather than an employee. It was strange and surprisingly comfortable. But she also noticed things. The way Rowan would tense when certain topics came up. The locked drawer in his desk he never opened in front of her. The conversations that would stop abruptly when she entered a room. He was still keeping secrets. Clara could feel it. One afternoon, she was filing contracts when she noticed something odd. Several recent agreements were signed by someone named R.J. Hale instead of Rowan Hale. She pulled them out and compared the signatures, similar but not identical. Who's R.J. Hale? She asked when Rowan returned. Rowan's expression went carefully neutral. My father. Those are old contracts. These are dated from last year. Then they're renewals of old contracts, my father's original signature. Clara didn't believe him, but she let it go. For now. That evening, she found Walter at the general store buying supplies. He looked surprised to see her. Mrs. Hale, didn't expect to run into you down here. Clara's fine, and I needed some air. Walter nodded, clearly uncomfortable. They walked outside together, the early evening light slanting through the trees. Can I ask you something? Clara said. About Rowan. Walter's expression became guarded. Depends on the question. How long have you worked for him? 6 years, since right after his father died. And before that? I worked for his father, and before that his grandfather. Walter's voice held a note of pride. My whole life has been this operation. Then you know the family well. As well as anyone, I suppose. Clara chose her next words carefully. Rowan mentioned his uncle challenges his leadership. What's that about? Walter's face darkened. Richard Hale, Rowan's uncle. He's convinced he should be running this place. Makes a challenge every year or two. Tries to get the courts to overturn the will. Never works, but he keeps trying. Why? Money, control, take your pick. Walter spat into the dirt. Richard thinks Rowan's too soft, too concerned with sustainability. Wants to maximize profit, damn the consequences. And the workers? Whose side are they on? Walter was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, split. The older guys remember how Rowan's grandfather ran things. Aggressive, profitable. They think Rowan's methods are weak. The younger guys see what Rowan's building, something stable, something that'll last. They're more loyal to him. And you? Me? Walter laughed bitterly. I'm caught in the middle. I see Rowan's point about sustainability, but I also see the contracts we're losing, the buyers going elsewhere because we can't meet volume. It's frustrating. Clara understood that tension, the gap between long-term vision and short-term survival. She'd lived it for 3 years. For what it's worth, she said, I think Rowan's right. Short-term profit isn't worth long-term collapse. Walter looked at her with something like respect. You might be the first person to tell him that, besides me. They parted ways and Clara headed back to the main house. But instead of going inside, she walked to the office building. Through the window, she could see Rowan at the desk again, working late. This time, she went in. Rowan looked up, surprised. Clara, it's late. I know, I wanted to ask you something. All right. Clara pulled out the contracts with R.J. Hale's signature. Tell me the truth. Who signed these? Rowan's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he'd lie again. Then he sighed. I did. Why use your father's name? Because some buyers won't work with me. They think I'm too young, too inexperienced, but they trusted my father, so I use his signature on renewals, maintain the relationship. That's fraud. It's survival. Rowan met her eyes. You want the truth? Fine. Half the people I deal with think I'm a joke. A kid playing businessman. Using my father's name buys me credibility I wouldn't have otherwise. And what happens when they find out? They won't. The contracts are legal, the terms are fair, the signature is just a formality. Clara set the contracts down. You're taking a huge risk. I know. If your uncle finds out, he won't. You're the only person who's noticed, and you're my wife. You have no reason to tell him. Clara realized this was a test. Rowan was trusting her with information that could destroy him. If she wanted leverage, this was it. I won't say anything, she said finally. But Rowan, this is dangerous. If it comes out, it'll destroy everything you've built. I know, but right now it's necessary. They stood in silence for a moment. Clara felt the weight of the secret settling between them. One more thing binding her to this man, this place, this complex web of half-truths and survival. Is there anything else I should know? She asked quietly. Rowan hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing that affects you directly. It wasn't a denial, just a deflection. Claire recognized the technique. She'd used it herself plenty of times. All right, she said. I'll keep your secret, but no more lies between us. If I'm going to help you, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Fair enough? Clara turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. When your uncle does show up, and Walter says he will, what exactly do you need me to do? Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Be my wife. Completely, convincingly. Make him believe this marriage is real, permanent, unshakable. Can you do that? Clara thought about it. Could she pretend to be in love with a man she barely knew? Could she sell a relationship that was really just a business transaction? Yes, she said. I can do that. Good. Rowan's expression was unreadable. Because when Richard comes, he'll be looking for any weakness, any crack in the story. We can't give him one. Clara nodded and left. Walking back to the house through the darkening valley, she wondered what exactly she'd just agreed to. Playing house with a stranger, lying to protect his empire, becoming part of a deception that could blow up in all their faces. But then, wasn't that what marriage often was? Especially out here, where survival mattered more than romance. People married for land, for security, for 100 practical reasons that had nothing to do with love. At least she and Rowan were honest about it. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Clara had agreed to keep Rowan's secret. She was in the office, reconciling shipment records against payment receipts, when Rowan walked in holding a slip of yellow paper. His face had gone pale. He's coming, Rowan said. Clara didn't need to ask who. When? Friday. Says he's bringing investors to tour the operation. Rowan set the telegram on the desk. It's a power play. He wants to embarrass me in front of potential buyers. Clara picked up the telegram and read it. The language was formal, almost polite, but the threat underneath was clear. Richard Hale was coming to demonstrate his nephew's inadequacy to people who controlled money. What kind of investors, she asked. Timber buyers, probably. Railroad men. People who could make or break our contracts. Rowan paced to the window. Richard's been talking to them, building relationships, positioning himself as the real power here. Now he's bringing them to see how young and inexperienced I am. So we prove him wrong. How? I am young. I am relatively inexperienced compared to him. Clara stood. But you're not incompetent and you're not alone anymore. She moved beside him at the window. You have a wife now, a household, stability. That's what you wanted the marriage to prove, right? So let's prove it. Rowan looked at her. You understand what that means? We'll have to convince them this is real, not just legal, but real. I know. Richard will be looking for cracks. Any sign this is a sham marriage and he'll use it against me. Then we don't give him any cracks. Claire's voice was steady. We've been working together for 3 weeks. We know each other better than most married couples do after 6 months. We can make this work. Rowan studied her face. You're not scared? Terrified. But I've been terrified before. It never stopped me from doing what needed to be done. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper, harder to name. All right, then we prepare. They spent the next 3 days getting ready. Rowan briefed Clara on every aspect of the operation: production numbers, contract terms, harvest schedules, worker relations. Clara absorbed it all with the same focused intensity she'd brought to keeping her father alive. This was just another kind of survival math. Margaret helped with the house, making sure everything looked appropriately domestic. Clara moved some of her belongings into Rowan's room, creating the appearance of a shared space. It felt strange, intimate in a way she wasn't prepared for, but necessary. Her father watched these preparations with quiet concern. You're getting in deep, he said the night before Richard's arrival. Clara was sorting through Rowan's books, memorizing titles in case anyone asked about shared interests. I'm already in deep, might as well commit fully. That's not what I mean. Her father's voice was gentle. I'm watching you two work together. The way you talk, the way you move around each other. It's starting to look less like an act. Clara's hand stilled on the books. It's just familiarity. We spend all day in the same office. If you say so. What else would it be? Her father didn't answer, just gave her a look that said he knew better. Clara didn't sleep well that night. She lay in her own room. Soon she'd have to move to Rowan's for the duration of the visit, and thought about what they were about to do. Lie to wealthy, powerful men. Pretend a business arrangement was love, hope nobody looked too closely. The stakes felt impossibly high. Friday morning dawned gray and cold. Clara dressed carefully in one of the better dresses Margaret had altered for her. Not too fancy. She was supposed to be a mountain wife, not city society, but nice enough to suggest Rowan provided well. She found Rowan in the kitchen, already awake, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Ready? She asked. No, but we're doing this anyway. He looked up at her. Thank you, Clara, for agreeing to this. I know it's asking a lot. We had a deal. I'm keeping my end. They heard the wagons before they saw them. 3 of them, rolling up the valley road with 6 men total. Clara watched from the window as they approached. The man in the lead wagon was older, maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and the kind of bearing that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. Richard Hale. Showtime, Rowan murmured. They walked out onto the porch together. Rowan's hand found Clara's and squeezed once. Reassurance or warning, she wasn't sure which. Then they were facing the arriving party. Richard climbed down from his wagon, his eyes sweeping over the valley before settling on Rowan. Nephew, good to see you. Uncle Richard, Rowan's voice was neutral. Wasn't expecting a visit. I sent a telegram. You sent notice. That's not quite the same as asking permission. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't realize I needed permission to visit family property. The emphasis on family was deliberate. Richard was already establishing his claim, his right to be here. Of course not, Rowan said smoothly. You're always welcome. Though I'm curious why you brought guests. Business associates. Thought they'd like to see the operation. Richard's gaze shifted to Clara. And who is this? My wife. Rowan's arm went around Clara's waist, the gesture looking natural enough. Clara, this is my Uncle Richard. Uncle, my wife Clara. Richard's expression flickered, surprise, quickly masked. Wife? I didn't know you'd married. Recent development. How recent? Does it matter? Richard's eyes narrowed. He turned to the men behind him. Gentlemen, this is my nephew Rowan and his wife. Rowan, may I introduce Thomas Brennan, who I believe you know, and his associates Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Morrison. Brennan was the contract Rowan had been worried about losing. Clara recognized the name from the ledgers. The other two men looked like money, well-dressed, assessing everything with the cold calculation of investors. "Pleasure to meet you all," Clara said, her voice warm but not over-eager. "Please, come inside. You must be tired from the journey." Inside, Margaret had coffee and food ready. The men settled in the main room, their eyes roaming over everything. The furniture, the books, the small signs of domestic life Clara and Margaret had carefully arranged. "Quite a setup you have here," Brennan said to Rowan. "I've been buying your timber for 3 years and never knew the operation was this extensive." "We keep a low profile," Rowan said. "So I see." Brennan's gaze went to Clara. "And a wife now, too. When did this happen?" "A month ago," Clara said before Rowan could answer. "I know it seems sudden. It was sudden. But when you know, you know." She let a hint of shyness enter her voice, playing the part of a woman newly in love. Richard was watching her intently, looking for cracks in the performance. "Where are you from, Mrs. Hale?" Richard asked. "A settlement about 30 miles south. My father and I had a small property there." "And you just happened to meet Rowan?" "He came looking for workers. We got to talking." Clara smiled at Rowan, letting affection show in her eyes. It wasn't entirely fake. She'd come to respect him over the past month, even like him in a complicated way. One thing led to another. "How romantic," Richard said, the word dripping skepticism. "And your father approved of this hasty marriage?" "My father was dying. He approved of me finding security." Clara met Richard's eyes directly. "I'm not going to pretend it was some great love story. We were both practical people making a practical choice. But we've made it work." The honesty seemed to catch Richard off guard. He'd probably been expecting them to oversell the romance, giving him ammunition to attack. Clara's matter-of-fact admission diffused that angle. "Well," Richard said after a moment, "congratulations on your practical marriage." Rowan's hand found Clara's under the table, squeezed gently. She'd done well. After coffee, Rowan took the men on a tour of the operation. Clara stayed behind, playing the dutiful wife who didn't involve herself in business, but she positioned herself near the window where she could watch them move through the valley. Margaret appeared beside her. "That man gives me the chills." "Richard? He looks at this place like he already owns it." Margaret's voice was low. "I've worked here 6 years, seen him visit 3 times. Each time he acts like Rowan's a temporary obstacle. Rowan says he challenges the inheritance regularly." "He does. Never wins, but keeps trying. And he's got money, connections. Men like that don't give up easy." Clara watched the group disappear into the main mill. "What do the workers think of Richard?" "Split. Some think he'd run things better, make more money. Others are loyal to Rowan." Margaret paused. "You ask me. Richard would strip this place bare in 5 years. But try telling the men that when they're worried about their wages." An hour later, the touring party returned. Clara had moved to the office, positioning herself at the desk, with ledgers spread around her like she'd been working. It was a calculated choice. Show them she was involved in the business, not just decoration. Richard entered first, his eyes taking in the scene. "You work in the office, Mrs. Hale." "Someone has to keep the books organized." Clara didn't look up, continuing to write. "Rowan's brilliant with strategy and planning, but paperwork bores him. I'm good at details. It works." She could feel Richard evaluating this, trying to determine if she was an asset or a liability to Rowan's case. Brennan and the other investors were watching too, their expressions thoughtful. "What do you think of the operation?" Clara asked Brennan, setting down her pen. "Impressive, isn't it?" "Very. Though I understand there have been some changes in harvest practices." "The North Cut closure, you mean?" Clara pulled out a map. "Yes, that was Rowan's decision. The trees in that section are still too young. Harvesting them now would compromise future yields." "But it affects current contracts," Brennan pointed out. "Short-term, yes. But this operation was built to last generations, not quarters. Sacrificing long-term health for immediate profit is how timber companies go bankrupt." Clara traced the harvest zones on the map. "We're rotating through 5 zones on a 20-year cycle. Each section gets adequate recovery time. It means lower volume now, but sustainable production indefinitely." Richard's expression had turned stony. "My father didn't build this business by being overly cautious." Your father also nearly bankrupted it twice, Clara said calmly. Rowan showed me the records. Aggressive harvesting in the 1880s led to disease outbreaks that killed entire sections. It took years to recover. How would you know that? Richard's voice had an edge. You've been here a month. 4 weeks is plenty of time to read the historical accounts. Your father kept detailed logs. Very educational. Clara looked at him directly. I understand the appeal of maximum extraction, but this forest is a resource that can sustain this community for a century if managed properly, or be depleted in a decade if exploited carelessly. Rowan chooses the former. I support that choice. Silence filled the office. Brennan was watching Clara with something like fascination. The other investors looked impressed despite themselves. Even Rowan seemed slightly stunned. Richard's face had reddened. You're very confident for someone who knew nothing about timber a month ago. I'm very confident because the math works and the logic holds. Clara's voice stayed level. You're welcome to disagree, Mr. Hale, but disagreeing doesn't change the facts. Richard turned to Rowan. Your wife is quite outspoken. She's quite right, you mean. Rowan moved to stand beside Clara. Everything she said is documented. You know it as well as I do. You just don't like hearing it from her. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Brennan cleared his throat. Perhaps we could discuss contract terms, he said. That's really why I'm here. They moved to the main house where Margaret had set out lunch. The conversation turned to business specifics. Board feet, delivery schedules, pricing. Clara listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the mechanics of the deals being discussed. Richard watched her like a hawk, looking for mistakes. But Clara had spent 3 weeks living these numbers. She knew them cold. Midway through lunch, Richard made his move. I've been thinking, he said, addressing the investors, about the future of this operation. Rowan's done admirable work, but he's young, inexperienced. As the business grows, it needs leadership from someone with more seasoning. Are you suggesting yourself? Brennan asked. I'm suggesting we need to think seriously about succession planning. What happens if something happens to Rowan? He has no heirs, no clear line of... He has a wife, Clara interrupted. That's the beginning of a family line right there. A wife of 1 month. A legal wife, recognized by the state and county. Clara's voice was sharp. And given that I'm 22 and Rowan's 30, we have plenty of time to produce heirs if that's your concern. Richard's smile was cold. Of course. Though one does wonder about the timing. Rowan resists my suggestions for years, then suddenly marries just as I'm building support for leadership changes. Quite convenient. Are you suggesting our marriage isn't legitimate? Rowan's voice had gone dangerous quiet. I'm suggesting it's suspiciously timed. Our marriage is properly filed with the county. The certificate is public record. If you want to challenge its legitimacy, feel free to try. But you'll lose, just like you've lost every other challenge. The room had gone silent. Brennan and the other investors were watching this family drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination. Richard leaned back. I'm not challenging the legality. I'm questioning the motivation. A marriage of convenience arranged to strengthen your position. That's not a family line. That's a legal maneuver. Clara felt Rowan tense beside her. This was the moment. The crack Richard was looking for. If they hesitated, showed doubt, it would confirm his suspicions. She stood up. You want to know about motivation, Mr. Hale? Fine. I'll tell you exactly why I married your nephew. Clara's voice was steady, clear. I married him because my father was dying and I was about to lose everything. Rowan offered security in exchange for a legal partnership. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was 2 people making a practical arrangement for mutual benefit. Richard's eyes gleamed with triumph. So you admit... I'm not finished. Clara's voice cut through his. Yes, we started as a business arrangement, but if you think that makes this marriage less valid than one built on teenage infatuation, you're a fool. I've spent every day for a month working alongside your nephew. I've seen how he thinks, how he plans, how he treats the people who work for him. I've watched him sacrifice short-term profit for long-term stability. I've seen him turn down easy money because it would compromise the forest's health. She moved around the table, her eyes locked on Richard. You say he's too young, too inexperienced. I say he's visionary enough to think past quarterly returns. You say he needs seasoned leadership. I say he needs people who understand that sustainable business requires patience and discipline. And yes, maybe I knew nothing about timber 4 weeks ago. But I know numbers. I know planning. And I know when someone is building something that will last versus when they're just trying to strip value before everything collapses. Such is. Clara stopped directly in front of Richard. So here's what I think about motivation. I think you're scared. I think you see Rowan building something better than what your father built, something smarter and more sustainable, and it threatens you. Because if he succeeds with his methods, it proves your aggressive, exploit everything approach wrong. And you can't stand that. Richard's face had gone purple. How dare you? I dare because I'm his wife. I dare because I have every legal right to be here and every personal interest in this operation's success. And I dare because everything I've said is true and you know it. Brennan started laughing, actually laughing, breaking the tension. My word, Rowan, your wife has spirit. Morrison, one of the other investors, was nodding slowly. She's got a point too, about the sustainable practices. I've seen too many timber operations collapse from over-harvesting. Richard was on his feet. This is absurd. She's been here a month and thinks she understands. She understands the numbers, Caldwell, the third investor said quietly. I've been watching her during this discussion. She knows the figures, the projections. That's not something you fake. Because Rowan coached her. Nobody coached me, Clara said flatly. I read the ledgers because I wanted to understand what I'd gotten myself into. I studied the harvest records because I was curious. I memorized the contract terms because that's what I do. I learned things. And what I learned is that your nephew is running a smart, sustainable operation that will be profitable for decades if left alone, which is more than I can say for most timber companies. Richard looked around the room, seeing he'd lost this battle. Brennan and the other investors were clearly impressed with Clara, intrigued by Rowan's methods, unconvinced by Richard's arguments. This isn't over, Richard said to Rowan. It never is with you, Rowan replied. But you're not getting this operation, Uncle. Not now, not ever. It's mine, legally, morally, and practically. Accept it and move on. Richard grabbed his coat. Gentlemen, I think we're done here. If you'd like to continue discussions, we can do so somewhere more appropriate. But Brennan wasn't moving. Actually, Richard, I'd like to stay. Review the contract terms with Rowan properly. If his wife's assessment of the harvest sustainability is accurate, it changes my long-term buying strategy. Morrison nodded. I'd like to hear more about the zone rotation system. Might apply it to my own holdings. Richard stared at them, realizing he'd completely lost control of the situation. His attempt to embarrass Rowan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing weakness, he'd given Clara a platform to demonstrate exactly how strong Rowan's position was. Fine, Richard spat. Stay. Waste your time. But when this operation fails because of youthful idealism and feminine meddling, don't say I didn't warn you. He stormed out. They heard his wagon leaving minutes later. After he was gone, the room exhaled collectively. That was... Brennan searched for words. Intense. I apologize, Rowan said. Family politics shouldn't have intruded on business. Are you kidding? That was the most interesting meeting I've had in years. Brennan grinned at Clara. Mrs. Hale, you are a force of nature. Clara's legs felt weak now that the adrenaline was fading. I just said what needed saying. You eviscerated him, Morrison said with clear admiration. Politely, factually, but thoroughly. Impressive. They spent the next 2 hours going over contracts and business plans. Brennan ended up increasing his order, convinced by Clara's arguments about sustainable supply. Morrison asked detailed questions about the harvest rotation, taking notes. Caldwell wanted to tour the operation again, this time asking technical questions Rowan answered with confidence. By the time the investors left in the late afternoon, they'd strengthened every major contract and opened discussions for 2 new ones. Rowan walked them to their wagons. Clara watched from the porch as they shook hands, the investors clearly pleased with their visit. When they were finally alone, Rowan turned to Clara. That was incredible, he said. That was terrifying, Clara corrected. I can't believe I talked to your uncle like that. Neither can I, but it worked. Rowan's eyes were bright with something between amazement and gratitude. You didn't just defend me. You went on the offensive, turned his own arguments against him. He made me angry, suggesting our marriage was fake, questioning your competence. Clara sat down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. I meant what I said, though, about you building something good. Rowan sat beside her. Did you mean the part about knowing me better after a month than most couples after 6? Clara thought about it. Yes, we've spent more actual time together, working and talking, than a lot of married couples do in their entire courtship. We know how each other thinks. That counts for something. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the valley. Workers were finishing their shifts, heading toward the barracks and cabins. Smoke rose from chimneys, the whole operation settling into evening rhythm. What happens now? Clara asked. Richard will try again. He always does. But this was a major blow to his credibility. The investors saw him lose control, saw you make better arguments than he did. That'll spread. Make his next challenge harder. Good. Rowan looked at her. I owe you more than I can repay. You paid my debts and saved my father's life. We're even. That was the deal. This was, Rowan gestured vaguely, above and beyond. Clara shrugged. I told you, when I commit to something, I commit fully. Her father appeared in the doorway leaning on his cane. He looked stronger every day, the medicine and good food working wonders. Quite a performance earlier, he said. I was listening from the other room. Sorry if I was too loud, Clara said. Too loud, girl. You were magnificent. Her father's eyes were proud. Watched you take that pompous fool apart piece by piece. Your mother would have loved it. Clara felt unexpected tears prickling. You think so? I know so. She couldn't stand bullies either. He moved to sit on the other side of Clara. But I have to ask, was all of that an act? Or do you actually believe what you said about Rowan? Clara looked at Rowan, then back at her father. I believe it. He's building something real here, something that could last. And the part about the marriage becoming more than business? Dad? Just asking. Her father held up his hands. You two work well together. Anyone can see that. Just wondered if you'd noticed. He went back inside, leaving Clara and Rowan alone again. He has a point, Rowan said quietly. About what? We do work well together. Rowan was looking at his hands. This past month, having you in the office, getting your perspective on problems, it's been helpful. More than helpful. It's been... He trailed off. What? Partnership. Real partnership. I've run this operation alone for 6 years. Always made decisions solo, carried everything myself. Having someone who understands the work, who can challenge my thinking, who actually gives a damn about the outcome. It changes things. Clara understood what he was trying to say. She felt it too. The shift from transaction to something more collaborative. Maybe even something approaching friendship. I'm glad I can help, she said. They sat until full dark, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, the cold drove them inside. Margaret had dinner ready. They ate with Clara's father, the conversation easy, comfortable. Margaret joined them, another shift from formality. They were becoming a household, Clara realized. Not just people sharing space, but an actual functioning unit. After dinner, Clara went to her room out of habit, then remembered she was supposed to be sharing Rowan's now. The investors were gone, but maintaining the appearance still mattered. Workers talked. Richard had spies. They couldn't risk the truth getting out. She gathered some things and went to Rowan's room. He was already there, standing by the window. I can sleep elsewhere if you'd prefer, he offered. Clara looked at the bed, large enough for two barely. It's fine. We're adults. We can share space without it being weird. You sure? We're married, Rowan. Legally, thoroughly, publicly. Might as well act like it. They worked out a system. Rowan changed in the adjoining room. Clara took the bedroom. They settled on opposite sides of the bed with careful distance between them. It was awkward, strange, intimate in a way that made Clara's heart race, but also oddly comfortable. Clara? Rowan's voice in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For today. For everything. You already said that. I know, but I mean it. You saved this operation today. Saved my inheritance, my work, everything. I won't forget that. Clara stared at the ceiling. Just keeping my end of the deal. It was more than the deal. You went to war for me. For us. Clara thought about Richard's face when she'd confronted him. The investor's expressions as she'd demolished his arguments. The way Rowan had looked at her afterward, like she was something more than a convenient legal shield. Yeah, she said finally. I guess I did. She fell asleep listening to Rowan's breathing beside her, feeling safer than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Richard wasn't done. The operation still had problems. The pretense of their marriage would have to continue indefinitely. But tonight, they'd won. Against wealth, power, and family politics, they'd stood together and won. That had to count for something. The letter from Brennan arrived 2 weeks after Richard's disastrous visit. Clara was doing inventory in the warehouse when Walter found her, holding the envelope like it might explode. "This came for Rowan," he said. "From Thomas Brennan. Looks official." Clara took it, noting the expensive paper, the formal seal. "Where's Rowan?" "North Ridge, checking the new growth." Walter shifted his weight. "Should I ride up and get him?" "No, I'll open it." At Walter's surprised expression, she added, "I handle his correspondence. He won't mind." She broke the seal and read. Her eyes widened. "What is it?" Walter asked. "Brennan wants to triple his contract, and he's recommending us to 2 other major buyers." Clara looked up. "This is huge, Walter. This could change everything." Walter's face cycled through disbelief and something close to respect. "Because of what happened with Richard? Brennan says he's impressed with our sustainable practices, says the industry needs more operators thinking long-term." Clara reread the letter. "He wants to meet again next month to finalize terms." "Rowan's going to lose his mind." "Probably." Clara folded the letter carefully. "Don't mention this to anyone yet. Let me tell him first." She found Rowan that evening in the office, hunched over survey maps. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression made him straighten. "What happened?" Clara handed him the letter without preamble. She watched his face as he read, confusion giving way to shock, then something approaching joy. When he finished, he set the letter down very carefully, like it might disappear if handled roughly. "This is real?" he asked. "Very real. I checked the signature against previous correspondence. It's legitimate." Rowan stood, paced to the window, paced back. "Triple the contract, that's almost 40% of our total annual production. And the recommendations could bring in even more." Clara sat on the edge of the desk. "Rowan, this makes us major players. Not just a regional operation, but significant. Because you ripped Richard apart in front of investors. Because you built something worth investing in. I just explained it clearly." Rowan was still processing, his mind visibly working through implications. "We'll need to expand operations, hire more men, maybe open a second mill." "Carefully," Clara cautioned. "We expand sustainably, same as we harvest sustainably. No point gaining contracts we can't fulfill properly." He looked at her, and there was something new in his expression. Not just gratitude anymore, but recognition. "When did you become an expert in timber operations?" "When I married into one." Clara pulled out a notebook where she'd been sketching ideas. "I've been thinking about efficiency improvements. The transport system between the mill and the kilns, there's a lot of wasted movement. If we reconfigure the conveyor arrangement, we could reduce handling time by maybe 20%. Rowan took the notebook, studying her diagrams. "This is brilliant. Why didn't I see this?" "Because you've been looking at it the same way for 6 years. Fresh eyes help." Clara pointed to another sketch. "And the filing system in the main office is a disaster. I want to reorganize it by contract date instead of buyer name. Makes it easier to track renewal cycles." "Do it, whatever you think is best." Clara hesitated. "You're just giving me authority like that? You've earned it. And frankly, you're better at the organizational details than I am." Rowan handed back the notebook. "What else have you been thinking about?" They talked for 2 hours, Clara presenting ideas, Rowan refining them, both building on each other's thoughts. By the time they finished, they had a complete expansion plan, measured, sustainable, achievable. "We should tell Walter," Rowan said. "He'll need to start recruitment for the new positions." They found Walter at the barracks, playing cards with some of the older workers. The game stopped when Rowan and Clara entered. "Got a minute?" Rowan asked. Outside, Rowan explained about Brennan's letter and the expansion plans. Walter listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. "So we're growing," he said when Rowan finished. "Sustainably, yes. And Mrs. Hale here is running the efficiency improvements?" "She's implementing her own ideas, yes." Walter looked at Clara with something complicated in his expression. "No offense, ma'am, but a month ago you didn't know a saw blade from a planing blade. Now you're restructuring operations?" "A month ago I didn't know the difference," Clara agreed. "Now I do. Is that a problem?" "Depends. You making changes just to make changes or because they'll actually work? Come to the mill tomorrow morning. I'll show you the transport reconfiguration on paper. If you think it won't work, we won't do it. Walter considered this. Fair enough. Tomorrow morning, then. As they walked back to the main house, Clara said, He doesn't trust me. He doesn't trust change, and you represent a lot of change. Rowan's hand brushed hers, not quite holding, but close. Give him time. When the improvements work, he'll come around. Clara spent that night refining her proposals, making sure the numbers were airtight. She couldn't afford mistakes, not with Walter watching for any sign of incompetence, not with the whole operation's future riding on these expansions. Her father found her at midnight, still working by lamplight. You'll burn yourself out, he said gently. I need to get this right. He sat across from her. Clara, can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer. Okay. Are you doing this for the operation or for Rowan? Clara's pen stilled. What kind of question is that? The kind a father asks when he sees his daughter working herself to exhaustion for a man's business. It's my business too now. Legally, everything Rowan owns is community property. That's not what I'm asking. Clara set down her pen. I don't know how to answer that. It's both, I think. I care about the operation because it's interesting, challenging, important work. And I care about it because Rowan cares about it, and She trailed off. And you what? And I don't want to see him fail, or lose everything to Richard, or have to compromise his principles for profit. Clara met her father's eyes. Is that so wrong? Not wrong, just complicated. Her father's voice was gentle. You went into this thinking it was a business arrangement, but it's becoming something else, isn't it? Clara wanted to deny it, wanted to insist the marriage was still just practical, still just a deal, but her father deserved honesty. Maybe, she admitted. I don't know, we work well together. We think similarly. And after the thing with Richard, after standing together against him, it changed something. Do you love him? I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. I respect him. I trust him, mostly. I enjoy his company. Clara laughed without humor. Is that love or just successful partnership? Could be both. Could be neither. Only you can figure that out. Her father stood, patted her shoulder. Just don't lose yourself in his world, Clara. You've got your own strength, your own mind. Don't let anyone, even someone you care about, eclipse that. Clara thought about that conversation the next morning as she met Walter at the mill. She'd spread her diagrams across a work table showing the proposed transport changes. Walter studied them silently for 10 minutes. Finally, he straightened. This would work, he said grudgingly. Cut handling time, reduce breakage. It's good thinking. So we implement it? Have to shut down the mill for 3 days to reconfigure everything. That's lost production. 3 days lost now versus 20% efficiency gain permanently. The math works. Walter nodded slowly. All right, but I'm supervising the implementation. No offense, but the men won't take direction from someone they don't trust yet. That's fair. They shook hands. It felt like crossing some invisible threshold. Walter's acceptance, however grudging, meant something in this community. Over the next month, Clara's changes went into effect. The transport reconfiguration worked exactly as she'd predicted. The new filing system made contract renewals faster and more organized. She identified 3 suppliers overcharging for materials and negotiated better rates. The workers' attitudes began shifting. They still called her Mrs. Hale with formal distance, but she caught them listening when she explained new procedures, nodding when she made suggestions. Rowan noticed. They're starting to respect you. They're starting to tolerate me. Respect comes later. Take the win, Clara. She was in the office one afternoon when James Peterson knocked and entered, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Hale, can I ask your opinion on something? Clara looked up from the ledgers. Of course. James spread out a survey map. The west section is ready for harvest, but there's a section near the creek that worries me. The soil composition is different, more clay. I think harvesting there might cause erosion problems. What does Rowan say? Haven't asked him yet. Wanted your read first. You've been studying the land use patterns. Clara examined the map. James was right. The creek section showed different characteristics than surrounding areas. Harvesting without precautions could cause serious runoff. Leave a buffer zone, she said, sketching on the map. 50 yards from the creek edge, minimum. Harvest everything else but leave those trees to stabilize the bank. That reduces the harvestable area by about 15%. Better than losing the entire section to erosion. Clara made calculations. Even with the buffer, we'll still meet quota. And protecting the creek protects water quality for the whole valley. That's worth 15%. James studied her additions to the map. Rowan's lucky to have you. The comment caught Clara off guard. Why do you say that? Because you think like he does. Long-term, holistic. Most people just see trees and money. You see an ecosystem that needs balancing. James rolled up the map. I'll implement the buffer zone. Thanks for the input. After he left, Clara sat thinking about what he'd said. She did think like Rowan, or had she learned to think like him? Where did his influence end and her own judgment begin? The question bothered her more than it should have. That evening, a rider arrived with a telegram. Clara signed for it and read the message, her stomach dropping. She found Rowan in the dry kilns, checking moisture levels. We have a problem, she said, handing him the telegram. Rowan read it, his expression darkening. Richards filed another legal challenge, says our expansion violates the terms of grandfather's will. On what grounds? Who knows? He'll invent something. Rowan crumpled the telegram. This is because of Brennan's contract. Richard knows we're getting stronger. He's trying to block us before we become unassailable. When's the hearing? 3 weeks. County courthouse. Rowan looked at Clara. You'll need to come. As my wife, you're part of the case now. Clara nodded, though her stomach churned. Another confrontation with Richard, this time in court. But at least they'd had a month to solidify their position, to make the marriage look even more legitimate. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Rowan consulted with lawyers, gathering documents proving his rightful ownership. Clara organized every piece of paperwork that might be relevant, creating an airtight case. Her father's health continued improving, though he tired easily. One evening, he called Clara to his room. I need to tell you something, he said. Clara sat beside his bed. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. The medicine, the good food, the rest. I'm getting better, Clara. Really better. I know, I've noticed. Which means I've been thinking about the future. My future specifically. He took her hand. I'm not going to be an invalid forever. Eventually, I'll be well enough to work again, live independently. When that happens, what will you do? Clara didn't understand. What do you mean? Will you stay here, with Rowan? Or will this marriage end once I'm healthy enough that you don't need his support? The question hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the immediate challenges, Richard's attacks, the expansion, making the marriage look real, that she hadn't thought about the endgame. I don't know, she admitted. You need to figure it out, because that man is falling for you, Clara. Maybe you're falling for him too. But if this is still just a transaction in your mind, you need to be clear about that before someone gets hurt. Rowan knows what this is. Does he? Because from where I'm sitting, he looks at you like you're the best thing that ever happened to him. And you look at him the same way, whether you realize it or not. Clara wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Was her father right? Had the marriage evolved beyond its original terms without her noticing? She didn't have time to process that question before the hearing arrived. They rode to the county seat in the wagon, Clara wearing her best dress, Rowan in a suit that made him look older, more authoritative. The courthouse was a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and anxiety. Richard was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Winters. They looked confident, prepared. The judge was an older woman named Hawthorne, known for no-nonsense rulings and intolerance for theatrics. Clara took that as a good sign. Richard thrived on theatrics. We're here regarding the estate of Jonathan Hale, Judge Hawthorne began. Mr. Richard Hale has filed a challenge to the current management structure. Mr. Winters, present your case. Winters stood. Your Honor, my client believes his nephew Rowan Hale is violating the terms of Jonathan Hale's will through reckless expansion of the timber operation. The will specified sustainable management, not aggressive growth. We have documentation of the expansion plans, Rowan's lawyer countered. Everything is sustainable, carefully planned. Planned by whom? Winters interrupted. A man of 30 with limited experience? Or perhaps his wife of 2 months who knew nothing about timber before marrying him? Clara felt Rowan tense beside her. Judge Hawthorne looked at Clara. Mrs. Hale, you've been involved in planning the expansion? Clara stood. Yes, Your Honor. And what are your qualifications? I have none formally, but I understand numbers, logistics, and long-term resource management. The expansion plans are mathematically sound and environmentally responsible. Winters smiled like a shark. Your Honor, this proves my point. The operation is being run by an inexperienced young man and his even more inexperienced wife. This isn't sustainable management. It's reckless gambling with a legacy business. The business has grown 30% in profitability over the past month, Rowan's lawyer said. New contracts, improved efficiency, better resource allocation. The numbers speak for themselves. Because they're selling off assets to create the appearance of success, Richard interjected. Classic short-term thinking. We haven't sold anything, Clara said sharply. Every gain is from operational efficiency and new contracts based on our sustainable practices. Judge Hawthorne held up a hand. I've reviewed the financial records. Mrs. Hale is correct. No asset sales, just improved operations. She looked at Winters. What exactly are you alleging is being violated? The spirit of the will, Your Honor. Jonathan Hale wanted his legacy preserved, not transformed by inexperienced leadership making risky decisions. The will says the operation should remain in family hands and be managed sustainably, Judge Hawthorne read from the document. Nothing about experience levels or prohibiting growth. Mr. Winters, unless you have specific violations to cite, I'm inclined to dismiss this challenge. Then let me cite the marriage itself, Winters said. A sudden marriage to a woman of no means, perfectly timed to strengthen Rowan Hale's legal position. This is clearly a sham arrangement designed to circumvent the family management clause. The courtroom went silent. Judge Hawthorne looked at Clara and Rowan. That's a serious accusation. How do you respond? Rowan started to speak, but Clara cut him off. The marriage was prompted by practical necessity. Yes, she said clearly. I needed financial security. Rowan needed legal stability. We were honest about that from the beginning. But if Mr. Winters is suggesting that practical marriages are somehow invalid, he's wrong. People have married for property, security, and family alliance for centuries. That doesn't make those marriages fake. But you barely knew each other, Winters pressed. We knew each other well enough to recognize compatible goals and mutual benefit. And we've spent the past 2 months building a genuine partnership. I know how Rowan thinks, what he values, how he makes decisions. He knows the same about me. That's more than many couples have after years together. A partnership is not a marriage, isn't it? Clara's voice was steady. Marriage is a legal and social partnership. We have both. We work together, live together, build a future together. If that's not marriage, what is? Judge Hawthorne was watching Clara with interest. Mrs. Hale, do you love your husband? The question hung in the air. Clara felt everyone's eyes on her. Richard's hopeful, Rowan's unreadable, her father's knowing. I don't know if what I feel is love, Clara said honestly. I never had the luxury of courting or romance, but I respect him deeply. I trust his judgment. I believe in what he's building, and I will stand with him against anyone who tries to tear it down. If that's not love, it's something close enough to count. Silence. Then Judge Hawthorne smiled slightly. Mr. Winters, I find no evidence of fraud or sham marriage. The relationship may have begun practically, but it appears to have developed into a legitimate partnership, and nothing in Jonathan Hale's will prohibits his heir from marrying whoever he chooses, for whatever reasons. But Your Honor, I'm not finished. Regarding the expansion plans, I've reviewed the documentation. Everything appears sustainable, well-planned, and within the spirit of the will's requirements. Unless you have actual evidence of mismanagement or violation, this challenge is dismissed. Winters tried to argue further, but Judge Hawthorne shut him down. Within 10 minutes, the hearing was over. Richard had lost again. Outside the courthouse, Richard approached them with barely controlled fury. This isn't over, he said to Rowan. Yes, it is, Rowan replied calmly. You've challenged me 4 times now, lost every time. How many more defeats before you accept reality? Reality is that you're playing house with a girl who married you for money and pretending it makes you fit to run a business. Clara stepped forward. The reality, Mr. Hale, is that your nephew is smarter, more competent, and more successful than you'll ever be. And that kills you. So you keep filing these pointless challenges, hoping something will stick. But it won't. Because he's right and you're wrong. And deep down, you know it. Richard's face went purple. You little... Careful, Rowan's voice was dangerous. That's my wife you're addressing. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Richard turned and walked away, Winters trailing behind him. Rowan let out a breath. I think you just made an enemy for life. I already had one. Might as well earn it properly. They rode back to the valley in contemplative silence. Clara kept replaying her testimony in her head, especially the part about love. She'd been honest. She didn't know what love felt like. But the answer she'd given felt true in a way that surprised her. That night, back in the house, Clara found Rowan on the porch, looking at the stars. Can't sleep? She asked. Too much to think about. He glanced at her. What you said in court today. About not knowing if what you feel is love. I was trying to be honest. I know, and it was the right answer, but it made me realize I don't know either. Rowan turned to face her fully. This started as a transaction, legal protection for financial security, but somewhere along the way it became something else, and I'm not sure what to call it. Partnership, Clara said, like I told the judge. Is that all it is? Clara thought about the past 2 months, working side by side, sharing meals and space and goals, the quiet comfort of his presence, the way her heart lifted when he praised her work, the electricity when their hands accidentally touched. I don't know, she admitted. I never had time to figure out what falling in love is supposed to feel like. I spent 3 years just trying to survive, but it feels important, real. It is real, Rowan said quietly. Whatever label we put on it, it's real. They stood in the darkness, the valley spread out below them with its lights and life. Clara thought about her father's question. What would she do when he was fully healed? Would she stay? Leave? Could she even imagine leaving now? Rowan, she said carefully, when we made this deal, you said I was free to leave whenever I wanted. Is that still true? Rowan's expression was unreadable. Legally, yes. Practically, leaving would weaken my position against Richard, but I wouldn't stop you. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you want me to stay. Silence stretched between them. Then Rowan said very quietly, Yes, I want you to stay. Not because of Richard or legal protection or business efficiency, because I've gotten used to you being here, working beside me, challenging my thinking, making this place feel less like a battlefield and more like a home. Claire's heart was pounding. I don't want to leave. Then don't. But we should probably figure out what we're doing here, because I don't think we can keep calling this a business arrangement. What would you call it? A marriage, Clara said. A real one. Maybe not conventional, maybe not what other people have, but real. Rowan reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. I can work with that. Clara smiled in the darkness. So can I. They stood hand in hand, watching the valley settle into night. Nothing was resolved, not really. Richard would keep fighting. The operation would keep growing. Her father would eventually recover, and they'd have to figure out what that meant. But for now, in this moment, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not desperate hope born from having no other options, but genuine hope that maybe she'd found something worth keeping. A partnership that worked. A place that felt right. A man who saw her as an equal and trusted her judgment. Maybe that was love. Maybe it was something else. Either way, it was enough. The winter after the courthouse victory brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. Her father recovered fully by January, strong enough to walk the valley without his cane, healthy enough to start helping Walter with equipment maintenance. Clara watched him work one morning from the office window, her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Relief? Yes, but also something like fear. He looks good, Rowan said, appearing beside her. He does. You're worried. Clara turned from the window. When we made our deal, the whole point was saving his life. Now he's saved, healthy, which means the original reason for all this doesn't exist anymore. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Are you saying you want to leave? No, I'm saying I don't know what we are now. The deal was financial security in exchange for legal marriage. But I'm not desperate anymore, and you've beaten Richard in court, so what's keeping us together? Maybe the fact that we want to be together? Clara met his eyes. Do we? Or are we just comfortable with the arrangement? It was a conversation they'd been dancing around for months. The marriage had become easy, natural even. They worked together during the day, shared meals and space in the evening, slept in the same bed at night. But they'd never actually talked about whether this was temporary convenience or something permanent. I think, Rowan said carefully, that we should figure that out. Before Clara could respond, James burst into the office without knocking. "We've got a problem," he said, breathing hard. "Big problem. The river's flooded the lower road. We've got 3 loaded wagons stranded on the wrong side, and the Brennan shipment is supposed to go out tomorrow." Rowan swore. "How bad is the flooding?" "Bad enough that we can't cross with wagons, and the forecast says more rain coming." Clara was already moving to the maps. "The upper road loops around, but it adds 2 days to the route." 2 days we don't have," Rowan said. "Brennan's contract has a penalty clause for late delivery." "How much?" Clara asked. 10% of the shipment value. Call it $800. Clara traced alternative routes on the map. "What if we portage the lumber across the flooded section? Carry it over, reload on the other side." "That's a lot of manual labor," James said, "and we'd need every available man." "Then we get every available man." Clara looked at Rowan. "We can't afford to lose $800, or Brennan's trust." Rowan studied the map, then nodded. "Do it. James, organize the crews. I want every piece of that lumber across the flood zone by nightfall." What followed was organized chaos. Clara coordinated from the office, tracking crew assignments and lumber counts while Rowan worked on site directing the actual portage. By the time the sun set, they'd moved 2/3 of the shipment. The rest went by lamplight, men working in shifts, exhausted but determined. Clara brought food and coffee to the work site at midnight. The scene was almost beautiful in its intensity. Men moving in coordinated teams, lumber passing hand to hand, everyone focused on a single goal. Walter appeared beside her, covered in mud and sawdust. "Your idea's working. We'll have everything across by dawn." "Good. Never would have thought of it myself, just accepted the penalty." Walter looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You've got a head for crisis management." "I've had practice." They got the shipment out on time. Brennan sent a letter expressing appreciation for their reliability, even in difficult circumstances. The near disaster became an unexpected success, proving the operation could handle problems and still meet commitments. But it also revealed something Clara had been noticing for weeks. She was good at this. Not just competent, but genuinely talented. She could see solutions others missed, organize chaos into order, make decisions under pressure. The desperate girl, who'd counted fence posts to escape poverty, had transformed into someone who managed a small empire with confidence and skill. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I've been thinking," she said to Rowan a few nights later. They were in bed, the comfortable darkness making conversation easier. "About what I want, long term. And I don't want to just be your wife. I want my own identity here, my own authority." Clara rolled onto her side to face him. "The workers respect me now, but they still see me as an extension of you. I want to be recognized as a partner, not a helper." "You are a partner." "Legally, yes. Practically, not quite. You make the final decisions. I advise, but you decide." Rowan was silent for a long moment. "What are you proposing?" "Equal authority, real partnership. I run operations and administration, you handle strategy and contracts. We make major decisions together, but within our domains we have full autonomy." "That's a significant shift." "I know. And if you're not comfortable with it, I understand. But I need to know if I'm building something of my own here, or if I'm always going to be Rowan Hale's wife who helps with the paperwork." Rowan sat up, lit the bedside lamp. In the warm light, his expression was thoughtful, serious. "You're right, you've earned equal authority. More than earned it. And honestly, the operation runs better when you're involved in decisions. So we're partners." Actually, Rowan extended his hand formally. "Equal partners in the Hale Timber Company." Clara shook his hand, then found herself laughing at the absurdity, shaking hands with her own husband to formalize a business relationship. But it felt right, important. This was them acknowledging what had been true for months but never officially recognized. The change became public a week later when Morrison, one of the investors from Richard's disastrous visit, arrived unexpectedly. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Morrison said as Clara welcomed him. "I was in the area and wanted to discuss a proposition." They gathered in the office, Clara, Rowan, and Morrison. The investor spread papers across the desk. I've been expanding my railroad holdings, Morrison explained. I'm putting together a consortium of suppliers for a major construction project. Timber, steel, stone. I need reliable partners who can deliver quality materials on schedule. We're interested, Rowan said. What's the scope? 300 miles of new track over the next 5 years. I'd need roughly 10 million board feet of timber, delivered in staged shipments. Morrison looked between them. It's a massive contract. Would require significant expansion on your end. Clara was already calculating. We'd need to double our workforce and add processing capacity. Probably a third mill. Can you manage that level of growth sustainably? Morrison asked. Not quickly, Clara said, but over a year, yes. We'd need to phase the expansion, hire and train workers in groups, bring equipment online gradually, rush it, and we'd compromise quality or forest health. Neither is acceptable. Morrison nodded. That's the answer I was hoping for. Too many operators would promise the moon and deliver disasters. He pulled out a contract. I'm prepared to offer a partnership structure. You provide the timber, I provide capital for expansion. We split the railroad contract profits 60-40, your favor. Rowan and Clara exchanged glances. This was huge, not just a contract, but a partnership that could transform the entire operation. We'd need to review the terms carefully, Rowan said. Of course. But there's one condition. Morrison looked at Clara. I want Mrs. Hale to have signing authority. Equal to yours, Rowan. This partnership only works if I'm dealing with both of you. The request surprised them both. Morrison saw their expressions and smiled. I watched her dismantle Richard's arguments in that meeting. I've read the reports on how she managed the flood crisis. And frankly, her operational instincts are better than most men I've worked with for years. Morrison addressed Clara directly. I'm not interested in partnering with Rowan Hale alone. I'm interested in partnering with both of you. Equal authority, equal responsibility. Clara felt something shift in her chest. This was what she'd been asking for. Recognition as an independent force, not just as Rowan's wife. We'll need to review the contract, she said steadily. But if the terms are fair, you have a deal. They spent 3 days reviewing Morrison's proposal. The terms were generous but demanding. Significant growth requirements, strict quality standards, penalty clauses for missed deadlines. But the potential was staggering. 5 years of guaranteed business, capital for expansion, and legitimacy as major players in the industry. It's a risk, Rowan said as they reviewed the numbers yet again. Everything worth doing is a risk. Clara circled a particular clause. But we can negotiate this delivery schedule. The timeline's too aggressive for sustainable harvesting. Think Morrison will budge? Only one way to find out. The negotiation took another week. Morrison pushed for faster delivery, Clara pushed for environmental protections, and eventually they met in the middle with a phased schedule that everyone could live with. When they finally signed the partnership agreement, Clara's signature sat beside Rowan's, equal, official, recognized. That night they celebrated with Walter, James, Margaret, and Clara's father. The mood was jubilant, everyone recognizing this was a turning point. To the future, Rowan toasted, and to the partnership that made it possible. Which partnership? Walter asked, grinning. The business one or the marriage one? Both, Clara said. Turns out they're the same thing. As winter turned to spring, the expansion began. New workers arrived, carefully vetted and trained. The third mill took shape, built to Clara's specifications with improved safety features and efficiency. Morrison's capital funded everything, and the operation grew in controlled, measured ways. Clara threw herself into the work with an intensity that sometimes worried Rowan. You need to rest, he said one evening, finding her still in the office at midnight. I need to finish the hiring projections. They can wait until morning. Clara rubbed her eyes. I'm fine. You're exhausted. Rowan took the papers from her hands. Clara, I know you're trying to prove yourself, but you've already proven everything. Nobody doubts your competence or authority anymore. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to make sure this expansion doesn't fail. It won't fail. We have good people, good systems, and you've planned every detail perfectly. Rowan pulled her to her feet. But you can't work yourself to death. What good is success if you're too burned out to enjoy it? Clara knew he was right. She'd been driving herself relentlessly, afraid that any weakness would undermine the authority she'd fought for. But it was unsustainable. I don't know how to do this halfway, she admitted. Then we figure out balance together. They started implementing changes. Clara delegated more, trusting the crew leaders to handle day-to-day problems. She set boundaries around work hours, forcing herself to step away in the evenings. Slowly, she learned that leadership didn't mean doing everything herself. Her father noticed the shift. "You're learning to let go." "Trying to. It's harder than I expected." They were walking the valley together, her father showing her a new equipment storage system he'd designed with Walter. His health was better than it had been in 5 years, his energy seemingly endless. "I've been thinking about leaving," her father said casually. Clara stopped walking. "What?" "Not permanently, just I'm healthy now. Independent. I could get a small place in town, maybe do some consulting work for other operations. Give you and Rowan some space." "You don't have to leave, Dad. This is your home too." "Is it? Or is it yours and Rowan's home, and I'm just living here?" Her father's voice was gentle. "Clara, you've been taking care of me for 3 years. Now I'm better. It's time I stopped being your responsibility and let you build your own life." Clara felt tears prickling. "You're not a burden. I know. But I don't want to be the old man in the spare room while you're trying to figure out your marriage." Her father took her hand. "I'm proud of you, girl. What you've built here, who you've become. But you need room to grow without worrying about me." "Where would you go?" "There's a boarding house in town that needs a manager. Mrs. Chen's getting old, wants to retire. She offered me the position." Her father smiled. "It's honest work, keeps me useful. And I'd still be close if you needed me." Clara understood what he was really saying. He was giving her permission to move forward, to stop defining herself as his caretaker and embrace her new identity fully. "If that's what you want," she said finally, "it's what we both need." Her father moved out in May. Clara helped him settle into the boarding house, trying not to cry as she arranged his belongings in the small but comfortable room. This was good, she told herself. Healthy, the natural progression of life. But it still hurt. Rowan found her on the porch that evening, staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. "My father doesn't need me anymore. For 3 years, keeping him alive was the only thing that mattered. Now that purpose is gone and I don't know what to do with myself." Rowan sat beside her. "You find a new purpose. You've already started, building this operation, creating systems that will last. That's meaningful work, Clara." "Is it enough, though? Is anything ever enough?" Rowan's voice was thoughtful. "I think we're always reaching for the next goal, the next challenge. That's not bad. It's human." Clara leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When did you get philosophical?" "When I married someone who makes me think about these things." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the valley. Clara thought about how much had changed in 8 months. She'd gone from desperate and powerless to confident and influential. The operation had grown from regional to potentially national significance, and her marriage had evolved from transaction to something she still didn't have a name for, but knew was real. "Rowan," she said quietly, "do you ever regret this? The marriage, the deal we made?" "Never." "Why would I?" "Because you could have had a traditional wife, someone who loved you from the start, who didn't come with debts and complications." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I don't want traditional. I want partnership. Someone who challenges me, makes me better, stands with me when things get hard. That's what we have. Is that enough for you?" "It's everything." Rowan turned to face her. "Clara, I don't know if what I feel is what other people call love, but I know I want you here. I know I trust you completely. I know that when I imagine the future, you're in every version of it. If that's not love, I don't know what is." Clara's throat tightened. "I feel the same way. It's not what I thought love would be, but it's real. It's ours." They kissed then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd exchanged brief, performative ones during Richard's visit. But this was different. This was choice, not necessity. This was them acknowledging that the marriage had become real in every sense. Summer brought the first full harvest under the Morrison contract. Clara coordinated the massive undertaking, managing crews across 3 mills, ensuring quality standards were met, keeping shipments on schedule. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. The railroad buyers were impressed. Morrison visited in July and walked the operation with obvious satisfaction. "You've exceeded every expectation," he said to Clara and Rowan. The quality is exceptional, the delivery schedule perfect. I'm recommending you to 3 other railroad projects. We can't take on more than we can handle sustainably, Clara said immediately. I know. That's why I trust you. Morrison pulled out papers. But I do have another proposition. I'm forming an industrial investment group. We fund promising operations in exchange for minority equity stakes. I'd like to offer you capital for further expansion, not as a loan but as an investment partnership. Clara and Rowan exchanged glances. This was huge, a chance to grow even larger, to become truly major players. What would the terms be? Rowan asked. 20% equity for $100,000 in capital. You maintain controlling interest and full operational authority. We just want to be part of your success. They negotiated for a week, ultimately settling on 15% equity for $80,000. The capital would fund a 4th mill, expanded infrastructure, and a full safety and training program. It was more money than Clara had ever imagined having access to. The night they signed the agreement, Clara stood in the office looking at the check. $80,000, made out to Hale Timber Company. We did it, she said softly. You did it, Rowan corrected. Your ideas, your management, your vision, this is as much yours as mine. Clara turned to face him. I need to tell you something. When we started this, I was just trying to survive. Keep my father alive, keep a roof over our heads. I never thought about building something lasting. But now, she gestured at the valley spread out below. Now I care about this place, these people, this work. It's become mine in a way I never expected. Good. Because I need you to care. The operation needs you to care. But here's the thing. I don't know how to separate what I feel for the work from what I feel for you. It's all tangled together. The business, the marriage, the partnership. I can't figure out where one ends and the other begins. Rowan moved closer. Maybe they don't end. Maybe they're just different aspects of the same thing. Which is what? A life we built together. Not perfect, not conventional, but ours. Clara realized he was right. They'd created something that couldn't be neatly categorized. It was partnership and marriage and friendship and love, all woven together until separation was impossible. I can live with that, she said. So can I. The expansion continued through fall. New workers integrated smoothly, the 4th mill came online, and the operation hummed with productive energy. Clara's authority was unquestioned now. Workers came to her with problems, buyers negotiated with her directly, even Walter deferred to her judgment on operational matters. She was 23 years old and running a multi-state timber operation. The irony wasn't lost on her. One afternoon in October, a rider arrived with news that sent the valley into chaos. Richard Hale had died of a heart attack in his Denver office. Clara found Rowan in the timber plot, staring at the telegram with an expression she couldn't read. Are you all right? She asked. I don't know. He was family, difficult, antagonistic, but still family. Rowan folded the telegram. And now he's gone. All those years fighting, and it just ends. Do you need to go to Denver for the funeral? Probably should. Will you come with me? They made the journey to Denver, a city Clara had never seen. Richard's funeral was well attended. Business associates, legal colleagues, people who'd known him in his prime. Several approached Rowan with condolences that felt more obligatory than sincere. At the reading of Richard's will, they learned he'd left his entire estate to charity, specifically cutting out Rowan with a clause stating, "My nephew needs nothing from me." Even in death, he's making a point, Rowan said on the train ride home. At least he's not challenging you anymore. True. Strange how that doesn't feel like the victory I thought it would. Clara understood. They'd spent so much energy fighting Richard that his absence felt strange, almost hollow. The enemy they'd defined themselves against was gone, leaving them to figure out who they were without that opposition. Back at the valley, life continued. The Morrison contract hit the halfway point with perfect execution. The new mills were profitable. The forest management practices showed measurable success with healthy regrowth in previously harvested zones. Clara spent a morning in November walking the North Cut, the section Rowan had controversially closed years ago. The young trees were thriving, growing thick and strong. In a few years, this section would be ready for selective harvest, proving Rowan's sustainable approach was working. She returned to the office to find Walter waiting with a nervous expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course." Walter sat heavily. "I've been working timber operations for 30 years, started when I was 16. It's all I know." "Okay?" "And in those 30 years, I've seen operations come and go. Most last maybe a decade before they collapse. Overharvesting, poor management, market changes. Very few make it long term." Walter met her eyes. "I didn't think this operation would survive when Rowan took over. Thought he was too young, too idealistic. I figured Richard would eventually take control and run things properly." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "I was wrong," Walter said bluntly. "About everything. Rowan's methods work, the sustainable harvesting, the long-term thinking, all of it. And you—" He shook his head. "You've turned this operation from a decent regional business into something that could last a century. The systems you've built, the partnerships you've formed, the way you've professionalized everything while maintaining the core values. It's remarkable." "Thank you, Walter. I'm not done. I'm 62 years old. I've been thinking about retirement, and I realized I can actually retire now without worrying about this place falling apart, because you two have built something stable, something real. That's a gift." Clara felt unexpected emotion welling up. "You're really retiring?" "End of the year. I want to spend time with my grandchildren while I still can." Walter smiled. "But I'm leaving knowing this operation is in good hands. The best hands, actually." After Walter left, Clara sat thinking about what he'd said. They'd built something stable, something real, something that would last. That evening, she and Rowan sat on the porch, their valley, their life spread out before them. "Walter's retiring," Claire said. "I heard. End of an era. He said something interesting about us building something that could last a century." "Think we can?" Rowan asked. Clara considered. "If we stay smart about it, keep prioritizing sustainability over profit, keep training good people, keep adapting to changes without compromising core principles." She looked at Rowan. "Yeah, I think we can." "What about us, the marriage? Think that can last a century too?" Clara smiled. "Well, we'd have to live unusually long lives, but for however long we do live, yes, I think we can make this work. Even though it started as a desperate deal, maybe because it started that way. We didn't have illusions of romance or perfection, we just had honesty and mutual need. That's a pretty solid foundation." Rowan took her hand. "I love you, Clara. I don't know when it happened or how to define it properly, but I love you." Clara squeezed his hand. "I love you too. In whatever form love takes for people like us." The first snow fell in December, blanketing the valley in white. Clara stood at the office window watching workers move through the winter landscape, the mills running smoothly despite the cold. Her father visited for Christmas, looking healthy and happy. He'd thrived in his new role managing the boarding house, made friends in town, built a life of his own. "You look good," Clara told him. "So do you. Happy. Settled." Her father glanced around the office with its organized files and detailed records. "This is really yours now, isn't it?" "Ours, mine, and Rowan's." "But you're not just his wife anymore. You're a force in your own right." Clara thought about that. It was true. She'd become someone people recognized independently of Rowan. Clara Hale, the woman who ran Hale Timber's operations with ruthless efficiency and ethical commitment. Not just Rowan's wife, but a person who'd built her own reputation and authority. "I didn't expect this," she admitted. "When I married Rowan, I just wanted security. I never imagined I'd find purpose. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the deals we make out of desperation turn into the best decisions we ever made." New Year's came with parties in the workers' barracks, the whole valley celebrating another successful year. Clara and Rowan made rounds, thanking people for their work, sharing in the collective pride. As midnight approached, they found themselves alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, lights twinkled in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, the whole operation glowing with life and warmth. "Remember when I first brought you here?" Rowan asked. "You were furious about the deception, called it an empire." "It was an empire. Still is." Clara leaned against him. "But now it's my empire too." "Any regrets?" Clara thought about the girl she'd been 9 months ago, desperate, frightened, counting fence posts while her world collapsed. That girl had made a gamble that seemed insane at the time, Married a stranger for money, bet everything on a man she didn't know, and somehow, impossibly, it had worked. No regrets, she said. This isn't the life I planned, but it's a good life. Maybe better than anything I could have planned. Even with all the challenges, Richard's attacks, the expansion stress, the constant pressure, especially with those things, because they proved I could handle them, that I was capable of more than survival. I was capable of thriving. Clara turned to face Rowan. You gave me more than financial security. You gave me the chance to discover who I could be. You gave yourself that chance. I just provided the opportunity. Maybe that was true. Maybe the strength had always been in Clara, just waiting for circumstances that would force it to surface. The 3 years of keeping her father alive, the desperate resourcefulness, the ability to see patterns and solve problems, those skills had been there. She just needed a bigger arena to use them. Midnight struck with cheers from the valley below. Rowan kissed Clara as fireworks lit the sky, a celebration and a promise. The new year brought more growth. Morrison's railroad contracts expanded. Clara negotiated 3 new partnerships, and the operation's reputation for quality and reliability spread through the industry. They were becoming what Clara had accused Rowan of being that first night, a timber empire, powerful and sustainable. But they were also becoming something else, a model for how business could be done differently, sustainably, ethically, with concern for both profit and preservation. Other operations started copying their zone rotation methods. Industry journals wrote articles about their practices. They became proof that long-term thinking could be more profitable than short-term extraction. Clara found herself being invited to speak at industry conferences, share their methods, explain their philosophy. It was strange standing in front of rooms full of men twice her age, explaining forestry management and operational efficiency. But she'd learned to be comfortable with strange. One evening in March, Clara discovered something that changed everything again. She'd been feeling off for weeks, tired, nauseous, emotional in ways that weren't normal for her. At first, she dismissed it as stress. Then Margaret had looked at her one morning with knowing eyes and said, "When was your last monthly?" Clara had counted back and felt the world tilt. She told Rowan that night, straight and simple, like she told him everything. "I'm pregnant." Rowan went very still. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming. All the signs are there." "How do you feel about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? How did she feel? They'd never discussed children, never planned for this. The marriage had been about legal protection and partnership, not building a traditional family. Scared, Clara admitted, but also curious. I never thought about being a mother. It wasn't on my list of possibilities. But now that it's happening, I want to see if I can do it well. Rowan pulled her close. "You'll do it brilliantly. You do everything brilliantly." "Childbirth kills women, Rowan, especially out here, far from doctors." "Then we'll bring a doctor here, or go to Denver for the birth. Whatever you need to be safe." They made arrangements. Denver had good hospitals, experienced doctors. Clara would go there for the last 2 months of pregnancy and the birth itself. It meant leaving the valley, leaving the operation, but some things were more important. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Clara hated being limited in her activities. She continued working as long as possible, reorganizing systems so they could run smoothly in her absence. "You're nesting," Margaret observed, watching Clara create the 15th procedural manual. "I'm ensuring continuity of operations." "You're nesting, making sure everything's perfect for when you're gone." Maybe Margaret was right. Clara found herself obsessed with details, wanting everything documented, every process perfected. If something happened during childbirth, and things did happen, women died, babies died, she wanted the operation to continue. Her legacy couldn't be allowed to collapse just because she wasn't there to manage it. She went to Denver in August, Rowan accompanying her. They rented a house near the hospital and waited. Clara chafed at the inactivity, wrote long letters to Walter and James about operational details, drove Rowan crazy with her restlessness. Their daughter was born on September 15th after 20 hours of difficult labor. Clara survived, exhausted and battered, but alive. The baby was healthy, squalling with impressive volume. "What should we name her?" Rowan asked, holding the tiny red-faced creature with uncertain tenderness. Clara thought about her mother, who died when Clara was young, about the strength it had taken to survive in mountain country as a woman. about the legacy she wanted to leave her daughter. Eleanor, she said, for my mother, but we'll call her Ellie. They brought Ellie home to the valley in October. The whole operation turned out to welcome them, workers lining the road, cheering and whistling. Clara held her daughter and felt overwhelmed by the reality of it. This tiny person who would grow up here, in this valley, part of this community they'd built. Margaret had transformed one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery. Claire's father had carved a cradle with his own hands, intricate and beautiful. Even Walter, who claimed to hate babies, had left a small stuffed bear. Being a mother was harder than running a timber operation. Ellie required constant attention, constant care, constant vigilance. Clara felt perpetually exhausted, perpetually inadequate, perpetually amazed that this small human depended on her completely. But she also felt something else, a fierce protective love she'd never experienced before. This was her daughter, hers and Rowan's, a person they'd created who would carry their legacy forward. Think she'll want to run the operation someday? Rowan asked one night, watching Ellie sleep. Maybe. Or maybe she'll want something completely different. Clara stroked Ellie's tiny hand. Either way, we'll make sure she has choices, real choices, not just desperate gambles, like her mother had to make? Exactly. I want her to choose her path because she wants it, not because survival demands it. They settled into new rhythms. Clara returned to work part-time, bringing Ellie to the office in a basket, somehow managing to review contracts while nursing. It wasn't graceful or easy, but it worked. The operation continued thriving. The Morrison contracts extended for another 5 years. New partnerships formed. The Valley community grew, adding more families, more children. They built a proper school, hired a real teacher, created infrastructure that would last generations. Clara was 24 years old, running a timber empire, raising a daughter, partnering with her husband to build something that would outlive them both. Some days she could barely believe it was real. One afternoon in December, Clara stood on the ridge where she and Rowan had celebrated New Year's. Below her, the valley spread out in all its winter beauty, mills running, smoke rising, people moving with purpose and confidence. She thought about the desperate girl who'd married a stranger 9 months ago. That girl had been so scared, so uncertain, so convinced she was giving up her life for survival. But that girl had been wrong. She hadn't given up her life. She'd stepped into a bigger one. The marriage that began as a transaction had become a true partnership. The business arrangement had evolved into love. Maybe not conventional love, maybe not what stories promised, but real love based on respect and trust and shared purpose. And the desperate gamble had transformed into something extraordinary. Clara heard footsteps and turned to find Rowan approaching with Ellie bundled against the cold. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "Just thinking." About? About how strange life is. How the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to take the chances when they appear. Rowan handed her their daughter. Any wisdom to share with Ellie when she's old enough to understand? Clara looked at her daughter's sleeping face and thought about what she'd learned, about survival and strength, about taking risks when you had nothing to lose, about building something from desperation and determination. "I tell her that sometimes the best deals are the ones that seem impossible," Clara said slowly. "That strength isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet persistence through the hardest moments. That partnership matters more than perfection, and that the life you plan isn't always the life you need." "Good wisdom," Rowan said. "I had good teachers. Desperation, necessity, you." They stood together on the ridge, watching their valley settle into evening. Somewhere below, Margaret was preparing dinner. Claire's father was probably playing chess with Walter. James was checking the kilns. The whole operation functioning smoothly, sustained by systems and people Clara had helped build. This was her legacy. Not just the business, though that mattered. Not just the marriage, though that had become real and deep and more important than she'd ever imagined. But the whole interwoven tapestry, the sustainable practices that would preserve forests for generations, the community that thrived on fair wages and safety, the daughter who would inherit choices instead of desperation. Clara Vance had come to this valley with nothing but debts and fear. Clara Hale was leaving a mark that would last 100 years. "Ready to go back?" Rowan asked. Clara looked one more time at the valley spread below, her valley, their valley, Ellie's future. Then she smiled. Yes, she said. Let's go home. They walked down together as the sun set, a family heading toward warmth and light. Behind them, the valley glowed with purpose and promise. Ahead of them, a future built on courage and clear-eyed choice. The desperate deal that shouldn't have worked had become something Clara never could have imagined. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Not just security, but meaning. Not just a transaction, but love. And in the end, that was worth more than all the timber in the mountains.